Written by Avery Cross. Narrated by Jack Ainsworth. Chapter 1. Cody.
Frost lined the edges of the window. Beyond it, the first snow of the season covered what was usually a brightly colored garden overflowing with life. Now it was shades of gray. The snowfall was far too gentle for what was going on inside me. Too calm. From inside there was a chaotic whirlwind of emotions I was failing to sort through, and too many memories of a day I wished I could forget. I'd taken a couple of days away from academy and watching over Megan Wright, daughter of 2 council members. Luke and Nick Pierce had assured me they could handle keeping an eye on her for a day. Actually, they'd insisted. After what happened in that haunted house at the festival, I'd been the closest to losing it since I'd learned to put my emotions behind an invisible wall. Megan's screams were going to be impossible to forget, as was the fear that had been in her eyes. Not fear for herself, fear for me. She was afraid of hurting me, because Megan wasn't a normal summoner. She had the ability to call all 5 elements. The question that remained was how. Who was she? I slouched lower in the chair I'd been sitting in for the past couple of hours. I hadn't wanted to go back to my quarters at Talon HQ. With nowhere else to go, I'd taken the time to drive out to the home Mom lived at now. It was just a few hours northeast of Academy. There were several summoners here. Most, like Mom, had once been in the military. Here they were able to live in a protected environment. It wasn't a bad place. I'd spent a few years here myself, staying by Mom's side after we watched Dad die. We'd both been wounded in the attack, but Dad, he'd taken the brunt of the hit. He'd taken it and saved us. My back was scarred, but Mom's whole left side bore the marks caused by a crazed spirit summoner. She sat beside me, staring out the window. There was no emotion in her eyes. There hadn't been in years, not unless she was caught in the throes of an episode or thinking it was that tragic day all over again. I reached for her hand and held it. It was on a day like this one that the attack had happened, cold and snowing. Thankfully, she appeared too far gone today to notice. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, I told her softly. I was doing my job. I was protecting her. That's all I was supposed to do, and now I'm so messed up inside about it all. I don't know, she's wicked smart, and those damn freckles on her cheeks kill me. I shouldn't want to be with her, but I can't help it now. Mom's hand flexed in mine, but she made no other response to indicate she'd heard me. She's the first person that's made me feel something in a long time, I whispered, looking out the window while the snow continued to fall. I don't want to lose her, but I lied. I had no choice. I don't know if she'll forgive me for it, and there's something else going on with her. Megan's secrets were eating away at me. She'd gone through something terrifying. She had the scars to prove it. Then there was her fear and what she screamed while she was trapped inside that damned haunted house. She'd seen something. From the way she'd reacted, it was a memory, and not a good one. That message she'd received on her wall with the dead raven meant something. It had been a threat. I knew that much. She told me she wanted nothing to do with me, but I'd be damned if I was going to walk away from her. She might have thought it was all a lie, but what I felt around her wasn't. Those moments together reminded me of what it was like not to be cold and distant. She reminded me what it was like to live.
Cody,
Dr. Jillian said. I turned and offered her a nod in greeting. She entered Mom's room and sat on the edge of the bed close by. She looks good today.
She's been doing okay.
Dr. Jillian turned her knowing brown eyes on me, and a dark eyebrow arched.
But we both know you didn't only come to speak to your mother. Why don't we go down to my office and talk for a little while?
I stood up, gave Mom a kiss on the cheek, and left her room. Dr. Jillian walked beside me through the familiar halls, up to the 3rd floor, and finally to her office at the end of the corridor. This place brought back so many memories. Too many, and most of them weren't pleasant. The scars on my back ached. I rolled my shoulders and walked the perimeter of Dr. Jillian's office. She sat in one of the comfy chairs near the picture window, watching. Distant voices from the past flowed past my ears, Mom's screams, my shouting in agony while my wounds were treated. The other Talons who'd brought us here telling us they were sorry they weren't able to stop the attack and save Dad. And the days that followed, where Mom fell into silence and stopped speaking altogether. These last few years, she'd finally started talking again, but it was sporadic. Most of the time, she couldn't remember what year it was, or what happened to our family.
"Why don't you tell me how your latest mission is going?"
Dr. Jillian asked. I continued to pace, but her question helped me push aside the memories. 3 summoners had been hired to stalk and terrify the kids of the council members at Academy. Megan was targeted too, obviously.
"But I hear the 3 were apprehended thanks to you."
Me and 2 others, yeah. But now we believe there's a 4th out there.
"There's more to it than that. You saw something," she mused. "That's why you're here. It's bringing up the past."
I stopped walking near the windows. Absently, I knocked my fist against the frame. Meg was attacked by someone. She was screaming in pain, and I almost couldn't get to her. Because of that, she found out that I was undercover by order of her parents. She wants nothing to do with me now.
"She's more to you than just a charge."
I shrugged. There was no point in lying to Dr. Jillian. She'd been seeing through my bullshit since I was a teenager. She was. Now, I don't know. I kept knocking my fist on the window frame.
"You have genuine feelings for her. You're feeling Cody. That's a big step."
What if I shouldn't? I'm messed up.
"No, you're not. You went through an extremely traumatic experience. I told you one day that you would have to face those feelings. You can't simply shove the past down and pretend it doesn't exist. Being with Megan, letting yourself experience emotions again, is a good first step toward that goal."
And if I can't handle it?
"Cody, you're far stronger than you give yourself credit for."
So was Mom, and look at her now. I started to knock my fist on the frame again, realizing what I was doing. I was tapping out a rhythm to the count of 5, pausing, and doing it again. Strangely enough, it was working to keep me calm, when usually I'd be about ready to fall back into that darkness. I don't want to put Megan through hell because of me.
"From what I hear, she seems to care for you, too."
"Cared, you mean?"
"You said she opened up to you, that you were there for her during her panic attacks, yes?"
"So?" Dr. Jillian sighed and stood up. She came to stand beside me, resting a gentle yet firm hand on my shoulder.
"You were there for her when she needed you. I have a feeling she'll be there for you if you let her be."
"Not if she refuses to talk to me again."
"She's mad, but it's understandable."
I started to speak, but what I wanted to say would be giving away part of Megan's secrets. Those weren't mine to tell. That last attack on her brought up some bad memories. I can feel that wall coming down. What if I can't keep it intact?
"That wall needs to come down eventually. It's what I've been telling you all along."
"You also said when it came down it might be too much for me to handle."
"If you're alone," she said sternly. "But you're not."
I knew what she hoped for, but being around Megan when that wall finally crumbled would be cruel. Megan had her own ghosts to deal with. Mine would have to wait a while longer to be confronted. Dr. Jillian sighed.
"You can't put off facing your past forever."
I took her hand and held it for a moment before letting it go. "I have to get back to Academy. If anything changes with Mom,
I'll call you. Take care of yourself, Cody. Please."
I nodded, then turned for the door. I walked out of the home, not stopping by Mom's room again. There was no point. She wasn't talking today. Sitting there talking to myself would only make things harder. I'd get back to Academy, find Megan, and do what I could to keep her safe. Whether she wanted me to or not, I'd protect her from whatever memories haunted her and whatever power resided inside of her. Maybe I'd finally get to the truth of the matter. And maybe she won't hate you, I told myself with a scoff, then stormed across the parking lot and headed for my car.
Chapter 2. Meg.
"Why can you never do anything that we ask?"
Mom ranted.
"Why?"
I glowered at the far wall while I gripped my cell phone in my hand. I'd been listening to my parents rant for the last 20 minutes, barely able to get in a word anywhere. I'm sorry.
Sorry? You're sorry for nearly exposing our secret. How many times have we told you that no one can find out aside from those we deem necessary?
You're the ones who gave me a damned undercover bodyguard, I shouted.
Don't you dare yell at me, young lady.
Mom let out an exasperated breath.
Time and again, we tell you to be careful. We tell you not to use your magic. We tell you to keep your head down and do as you're told.
It's not like I asked to be put in that situation.
And yet you were.
I told you Cody saw nothing, I lied. He came in after everything had happened.
It was far too close for comfort.
Yeah, no shit, considering I'm the one who almost hurt him because of it. I bit back those words and reminded myself why yelling them would only make everything worse. I don't know why you placed a guard on me in the first place, I said instead.
Because of this reason right here, Mom argued. You always find yourself in these situations. If Cody hadn't been there, what would have happened? You would have been attacked by the summoners sent there to stalk you and the others. You would have lost control. It would have been the warehouse situation all over again, only this one wouldn't have been as easy to cover up.
You mean because I might not have killed everyone who saw me use my power? I whispered. I shut my eyes, tapping out the count on my left leg. It was far too fast, but I was too damn close to falling into a swirling storm of memories I'd never find my way out of. The warehouse situation, that's what they referred to my kidnapping as. It had been a mess they'd been forced to clean up, nothing more.
What are the rules, Megan? Dad asked. Mom must have finally had enough of me if he was talking now. What are they?
Don't use magic, I recited out of habit. Don't let anyone know your real last name. Don't draw attention to yourself.
Do us a favor and remember them from now on.
You're acting as if it's my fault that I was being stalked.
Maybe not, but you put yourself in a risky situation by insisting on taking a walk instead of letting the Talons handle the problem. It's probably why they weren't able to catch the fourth summoner behind the attacks. You distracted them.
I bit my cheek to stop myself going off on him. They didn't care that I'd been chained down and forced to relive the night I'd killed all those people by accident. They didn't care that I'd relived the pain of nearly dying myself. They surely wouldn't give a shit if I'd told them about the message on my wall with the dead raven. I'm sorry, I forced myself to say again.
Stick to your lessons and nothing more,
Dad instructed. Hard to do that when I can't use my magic. You do realize I look like some damn freak here, right? Not being able to summon?
You are there to keep yourself safe.
Out of your way, you mean? I muttered without thinking. Dad sucked in a sharp breath.
Enough. I've heard enough. Cody has agreed to remain as your bodyguard.
Did you tell him the truth?
There's no need. Once you leave Academy, he will no longer be your bodyguard.
The thought of never seeing Cody again sent a burst of anxiety through me. I tapped out the count of 5 faster. Why can't one of your usual guards be here instead?
They are needed here. The threats you received were not focused on who we are. Cody does not need to know, and you will not tell him. Do I make myself clear? He is to remain in the dark. You are the daughter of 2 council members. That is all.
You're putting him in danger, I argued. If you're not going to tell him the truth, then I don't want him watching over me. I don't want him to get hurt because of me.
He stays in the dark, and he will remain as your bodyguard. Cooperate for once. Stop making this difficult for your mother and me.
Dad! Bastard, he'd hung up on me. I tossed my phone to the other end of the bed, fell onto my side, and curled up in a ball. It had been 2 days since I woke up in the infirmary and found out the truth about Cody. 2 days I'd been forced to see that night play out again, over and over. The scars covering my body still ached in remembrance of what my own magic had done to me. I shut my eyes and counted softly under my breath. It wasn't working. Nothing had worked these last 2 days, except thinking about Cody. His deep voice, grumbling as the stones had done around him when he was angry, was the only thing that truly calmed me down. Hearing him count, imagining his hand holding mine when he did it, helped keep the panic at bay. You can't have him, I whispered to myself, curling even tighter on myself. It's too dangerous. Spending so much time alone, I'd had the chance to reflect over the last couple of months with Cody. I had to admit to myself that at no time had I sensed him being untruthful, at least when it came to his feelings toward me. I'd been the one to kiss him first. I'd been the one to start us down that road, and he'd been there for me so many times. He'd been brought in as a bodyguard, but he'd become so much more. But it made no difference. If he was close to me, he was at risk of getting hurt. I couldn't do that to him. I wouldn't. Besides, even if I decided to take that chance, the second my parents found out we'd become so close, they'd replace him with another guard who wouldn't break their order of keeping their distance. Putting my head down and following my parents' rules was the only way to protect him, no matter how much I wanted to hear his voice, to have him hold me in his arms. I couldn't give in. I was better off alone, and in the end, Cody was better off without me. Chapter 3. Cody. I stood outside Megan's door Tuesday morning, waiting for her to emerge. Though I was continuing to keep out the ruse that I was a student, there was no point hiding from Megan anymore. She knew why I was here. Even if I stayed out of sight, she'd know I was around. I'd rather her see me and give us a chance to talk than hide in the shadows. The door opened at the same time the bracelet on my wrist warmed. Megan stepped out and jerked to a stop. Her eyes locked on mine, though hers were red and puffy. I'd stopped by her room last night after I'd returned. When I'd knocked, she hadn't answered, and there'd been no reply to the text I'd sent her before I'd turned in for the night. Something must have happened last night. Briefly, I wondered if she'd talked to her parents. Meg. She turned away from me and walked for the stairs. Great. This day was not going to go as I'd hoped. I kept my distance while ensuring Megan stayed in view. If she wanted space, I'd give it to her, today, at least. Maybe hanging back would give me a chance to figure out what was going on. She went to the dining hall, grabbed a muffin and a cup of coffee, but didn't stick around. She went straight to her first class and found her seat in the back. I lingered in the doorway for a few seconds, then backed away to find a spot in the corridor to wait. 2.5 hours later, Megan emerged last from the room. Her left hand was tapping against her thigh, and she had her head down. She looked worse than when she'd entered the room. The rest of the day went about the same. Each time she left my sight for her classes, she'd come out later, looking ready to bolt. I wasn't sure she'd make it through her practical lesson out on the grounds. The second it was over, she snatched up her bag and went to the dining hall. She picked up a sandwich and a soda. Then it was back to her dorm. She slammed her door shut and didn't come back out for the rest of the evening, unless it was to go to the bathroom across the hall. Not one word. She hadn't said one word to me the entire day. My fingers twitched, and then I told myself to retreat to my room around 11 after waiting around a little longer, in case she decided to take a walk on the grounds. I couldn't get my feet to move to the stairs. She was hurting. I wasn't sure if it was from the attack or something else. But she was hurting, and I couldn't do anything to ease that pain. The stones beneath my feet vibrated until I moved closer to her door. I raised my hand to knock, but I couldn't get myself to follow through. I returned to my room, thankful Jack was absent, and sank onto the edge of my bed. I dragged my hands through my hair, then stared at the floor. I'd expected today to be hard, but not to this extent. Did she really think she'd be able to ignore me forever? Or what we had between us? I couldn't. It wasn't possible for me to forget. It's because she's afraid, I reminded myself while I sat in the dark. You saw her face in the infirmary. You saw that look in her eyes today, too. She's afraid for you. Then I'll just show her she doesn't need to be, I told myself sternly. I wasn't going anywhere, and as sure as hell wasn't going to act as if we hadn't spent the last 2 months getting as close as we did. I wasn't scared of her power. I wasn't scared of her hurting me. I would not let her believe she was alone. Tomorrow would be rough, but somehow, I'd get her to see she didn't have to be afraid.
Friday's lessons ended and Megan did the same thing she'd done every day this week. The door to her dorm room shut and I cursed under my breath. With each day that had passed, she'd gotten worse. I don't think she'd spoken a single word to anyone. The times I'd tried, she'd tucked her head and stormed past me. Frustrated and unsure of how much longer Megan was going to last before she came apart, I hurried to my apartment, looking for Jack. He was there, but he looked as if he was ready to step out. "Are you going to see Nyala?" I asked. "Yeah." "Cody?" he asked, his brow arched. "Is there something wrong?" "Maybe. Do you mind if I come with you? I need to speak to her." Jack walked to the door, and I followed him down the hall to Nyala's apartment. He was able to step right into her place. She called out to him from the small kitchen, then paused once she turned around and spotted me.
"Cody,"
she said, smiling, but I saw the worry in her eyes.
"Let me guess. You're here about Megan."
"I just need to know if anything happened that day I was off campus."
"You mean after the whole haunted house debacle?"
Nyala asked.
"I tried to talk to her to see if there's anything I could do, but she wouldn't say anything. And this week, she's avoiding me."
"I noticed. I was hoping you might know something more than me."
"Aren't you two, dating?"
I shrugged and shoved my hands in my pockets. "I have no idea what we are now."
"Because she found out you're a bodyguard?"
I froze, but Nyala waved aside the question I was about to ask.
"Calm down. I'm friends with Briar, who's married to Zach Pierce, remember? I found out when things started going crazy with the fake stalker crap. I was worried about Megan's safety, but Briar assured me she was well looked after because she had you,"
Nyala told me.
"Is Megan mad at you because she found out the truth?"
She acted like she was, but I think it's more to it than simply finding out what I am.
"Because she likes you,"
Nyala said slowly.
"And you like her."
I glanced from her to Jack, who stood right beside her. He was grinning, but he wasn't looking at me. He was too busy watching Nyala. "It's complicated," I muttered.
"Oh, I bet it is."
She turned toward Jack and patted his cheek. He caught her hand and kissed her knuckles.
"It's always complicated. Trust us."
She looked back at me and tilted her head.
"You're scared for her."
"Have you not been paying attention to her this week? She's obviously not sleeping. She takes food from the hall, but I doubt she's eating it." I ranted and started to pace. "She's on the verge of having a damn panic attack every time she leaves her room now. She looks so scared all the time and alone. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when she keeps pretending like I don't exist." "You do have it bad," Jack commented. I jerked to a stop. There was no need for him to elaborate. He wasn't wrong either. I didn't know what to do, and I hated it. I hated feeling helpless. All that did was take me back to the day my family was attacked. I hadn't been able to do anything then, and now Megan was pushing me away right when she needed someone most.
"I think I overheard Hook saying something about her parents calling her," Nyala said quietly, "the day you were gone."
The few times she mentioned them to me, it didn't sound as if it was the happiest of relationships. What had her parents done that would make her turn inward so much? "Do you know anything about them?"
"No, unfortunately,"
Nyala said. I had no idea either. General Pierce had only given me intel as far as their summoning abilities and how they'd become council members. I had no information on how they were as people, let alone parents. I can't just stand around and do nothing while she tears herself apart. The scars on my back prickled. I rolled my shoulders, working to get the fabric of my shirt away from them. Now wasn't the time for me to start losing control or remembering my own fucked up past. I shoved my unease back into the darkness and threw up another layer to that invisible wall, hoping it'd stay up long enough for me to get through this current situation. Was it more than Megan had simply talked to her parents? Without knowing the full extent of what she saw while inside the haunted house, I had no way to help her get through whatever she was dealing with. It had to be tied with how she'd come to have those scars. It had to be why she was so damn afraid all the time now. I stormed to the door of the apartment.
"Where are you going?"
Nyala asked. "To think." I looked over my shoulder at her and Jack. "Thanks."
You're more than welcome to hang out with us at any time,"
she told me.
"You and Megan. We're all here for her, and you too."
It was strange hearing someone say that to me, as that's what Jack and Nyala had slowly started to become. Unsure of what to do with that, I gave her a nod. If she ever speaks to me again, maybe we will. I left the apartment and returned to my own. Jack probably wouldn't be returning tonight, which meant I had the whole place to myself to pace around while I attempted to figure out how to help Megan. No idea that came to mind sounded like it'd work. The apartment dimmed. I raised my head, blinking in confusion at the darkness outside the windows. I hadn't even realized the sun had set already. The clock on the microwave said it was 10:30. Where had the evening gone? Staying up all night wasn't going to do me any good. I walked down the hall and reached my room. Then the bracelet on my wrist warmed. Megan had left her dorm room. What are you up to now? I reached her floor in record time, wondering if she'd simply slipped into the bathroom. Footsteps sounded in the far stairwell, and I hurried in that direction. A head of familiar brunette hair disappeared through the doorway at the bottom. Once I was outside on the grounds and had Megan in view, I kept my distance. She had her hands shoved in the pockets of the oversized gray cardigan she had on. Her head was down, and she was walking fast across the grassy lawns and straight for the trees. She stepped onto the stone path lit by glowing orbs of gentle blue and white light. She disappeared into the shadows. I sped up enough that she couldn't get too far ahead of me. When I spotted her through the trees, she was in the same place she'd been the first time we'd met. She was stalking from one tree to the other, her hand tapping frantically against her thigh. I stayed behind the trunk of a tree. She was close enough to the path that the floating orbs of light lit up her face. At the sight of the tears streaking her cheeks, I clenched my jaw. The ground beneath my feet rumbled. "It's bullshit," she spat viciously and swiped at her eyes. "I can't keep doing this. I can't stay here. It's not fair. None of this is fucking fair." She tripped over her feet and fell into one of the trees. She caught herself, but it seemed to be too much for her. Throwing back her head, she let out a furious shout. Then her face was in her hands. Her shoulders shook, and the wall I'd spent trying to rebuild that one day apart from her cracked right down the middle. I couldn't stay away any longer. Not wanting to startle her, I moved onto the path and ensured my steps were loud enough for her to hear. Megan froze the moment she spotted me coming toward her. "Cody," she breathed. "What are you doing out here?" I started to answer, but she held up her hand. "Don't answer that. You're just doing your job." She wiped her cheeks with the sleeves of her cardigan. "That's not the only reason I'm out here. It should be. But it's not, and you know it." I took a step toward her, and she backed up one. "You can't pretend I don't exist forever." "I can damn well try." "Why?" "You know why," she yelled. "You lied to me. The one person I finally let myself trust who wasn't a part of that side of my life, and newsflash, you are. You lied to me," she repeated softer. "It'll be easier for us if we pretend none of that happened." She turned her back on me, but I spotted the look in her eyes right before. That wasn't anger glinting in her eyes. It was that damn fear again, and with it that same want I'd seen every time we were together. Quietly, I moved closer until she was within arm's reach. "You're right. It would be easier." I took hold of her hand and swung her around. She wound up pressed against my chest, her eyes shimmering much as they had every day we'd spent together. But I've never been one for taking the easy way out of any situation. I told you I could take care of myself. I told you I was patient. Those weren't lies. And neither was this. I leaned down and kissed her with as much heat as I had the first time. When her lips moved against mine and she squeezed my hand, the stress of the last few days broke into pieces. I wrapped her in my arms, forgetting for a moment that we'd spent so much time apart. She kept me pinned to her, and the familiar undercurrent of her magic reached out for mine. The ground rumbled beneath our feet. "We can't do this. We can't." She started to walk away, but I blocked her. "Everything. You're not who I thought you were, and She tried to walk around me, but I moved. "Why are you pushing me away? Is it because of what you saw in the haunted house?" I asked. "Or is it because you spoke with your parents?" She shoved her hands into the pockets of her cardigan. "This can't be anything real between us." "But it is, and you know it. Anything to me." "But it didn't. You didn't. You let me get to you. It was a fluke." wasn't. Her gaze drifted over my shoulder. She went pale and stumbled back. Her eyes went wide, and a single word fell from her lips. Raven.
Chapter 4. Meg. Why had I stayed? The moment I saw Cody's face, I told myself to get back inside. I couldn't be this close to him. I couldn't handle talking to him. The resolve I'd spent the last week building up, telling myself he was better off without me, vanished once his hand closed around my wrist. My hope of getting over what I had with him went with it after he kissed me, and I kissed him back because I'm an idiot. I wasn't mad at him, not for lying to keep his cover. He was doing as he'd been told. As much as I wanted to believe what we'd shared these last few weeks wasn't real, that was the lie. It was more than real, and I hated every day I'd spent away from him. But I couldn't have what I wanted. He had no idea what he was getting into. No idea. His fingers brushed against my hand, and a thrill shot straight through me. My lips felt his all over again. I faced him, unsure whether I was going to argue more or kiss him again. Then I spotted the ghostly face behind him. Meg. I tried to say something to Cody, but I couldn't get my mouth to work. Raven stood a few yards behind Cody, looking as burned and bloody as she had on the day I ended her life. She shimmered in and out of focus. Her lips stretched into the wicked grin I'd never been able to forget. Now, though, it was far larger than was natural. Her eyes were black voids that turned my body to ice. She raised her hand toward me. Her dying screams exploded in my ears. Cursing, I clapped my hands to my head and hit my knees. Meg! Cody knelt in front of me, holding onto my shoulders. What's happening? I could barely hear him over the racket in my head. Flashes of that night struck me, each one like a blow to my body, as if I were back there and being attacked all over again. My scars throbbed. I winced, then cried out at the burning agony coursing through every inch of me. Raven's screams went on and on. I couldn't see her through the tears in my eyes, but she was still there. I sensed her presence, as if I was standing in a walk-in freezer. I curled in on myself, wishing I could simply disappear and be done with it all. A tapping started on my left thigh. Through Raven's screams, a deeper voice was speaking. Counting. It was counting. I focused on those numbers being said. Slowly, Raven's screams quieted. The cold began to recede. The counting continued, as did the rhythmic tapping on my thigh. I lowered my shaking hand to the same thigh and began to move with the count. You're safe, the voice said. There's no danger. Everything's okay. You just need to breathe. Count to 5 and breathe. The counting started again. This time, I was able to count with him. Cody. It was Cody kneeling with me on the ground. Cody who dragged me out of the grips of the fear that had paralyzed me. Tears wet my cheeks, but I was able to see clearly now. Raven was gone as if she hadn't even been there. My voice faltered, and I sagged forward right into Cody's chest. He caught me up in his arms and held me. I'm sorry, I mumbled. He was running his hands up and down my back in a soothing motion. I'd missed being in his arms, and I hated myself for it. I buried my face against his neck. He paused for a second, then sighed and hugged me tighter. For what? He asked roughly. What did you see? Just tell him everything. Tell him the truth and be done with it. I wanted to. I wanted to blurt everything out right there. Despite what I'd yelled at him, I still trusted him. I wanted to find a way to make this work, but how could it? If the truth of who I was and what I'd done didn't scare him off? My parents finding out about us being together would ruin his life. They'd never let it happen. My heart broke a little more. I held on to Cody, soaking in the sensation of being in his arms for a little longer. Meg. It doesn't matter, I finally told him. None of it matters. I sat up and made it to my feet, slipping out of his grasp. I'm sorry, I can't do this to you. Do what? Everything,
I blurted. Just everything. Just let it go, Cody. Please.
So you expect me to stand by and watch while you completely come apart? He said, and the ground shook. You're not okay, Meg. Whatever you're going through, you can't deal with it alone. Trust me.
You have no idea what I'm dealing with.
I understand more than you think.
He rolled his shoulders, and a grimace of discomfort crossed his face.
I was brought here to be your bodyguard. That means protecting you from all threats, even if they're coming from within.
And if it hurts you in the process?
It won't. You won't.
You can't know that. You can't know anything because you don't know the fucking truth. No one can know the truth. All it will do is ruin your life. You think you know who I am? You don't. No one does. No one can.
You're not the only one with scars they hide away.
I doubt yours came from your own magic attempting to kill you while it murdered everyone else around you at the same time.
I clapped my hand over my mouth and backed away. Cody's eyes darkened, then filled with sympathy I didn't deserve. He reached for me, but I turned around and bolted through the trees. I sprinted all the way back to the dorm and reached my room right as Cody appeared in the corridor behind me. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back to it.
Why had I said that? What the hell was wrong with me?
Meg, Cody said and knocked. Open the door.
No. Go away, all right? Forget I said anything.
That's not going to happen.
Grunting a curse, I spun around and yanked the door open.
What do you want me to say, huh? What? You shouldn't want anything to do with me. All I'll do is make everything worse for you. Trust me.
I do trust you, he said, and the genuineness of his words shocked me.
If you want to pretend like there's nothing going on here, fine. But I can't do that. I won't. I'll be here for you until you realize the truth.
What truth? He stepped closer. Each time one of us breathed in, our bodies touched.
You know,
he whispered, backed away, and stormed down the corridor. I watched him until he disappeared into the stairwell. After a minute, I retreated into my room and shut the door. The truth was everything he'd promised me. Not that I could blame him. I was more than a mess. Happiness wasn't in the cards for me. Being with someone I liked wasn't. I done differently. My parents had messaged me this morning, checking that I was doing as I was told. They were nearby, watching. All I'd wanted was some fresh air for a few minutes. I should have known Cody would have a way of telling if I left my room. I should have known he wouldn't let me wander the grounds at night alone. Maybe you did know, and that's why you did it. You miss him. It doesn't matter, I told my reflection in the window. What'll happen? I leaned on the window and closed my eyes. My thoughts dragged me out of an episode, and somehow he'd been the one to reach me through the horrors I'd been forced. My window was Raven's pale figure. She grinned up at me. I had with my knees to my chest. I must have dozed off at some point. When I jolted awake in the woods, he'd held my hand the entire way. It was probably the most peeing. We'd locked eyes on her way back to her room. If there hadn't been so many students around, I would have tried. She'd been acting the week prior, except now she looked 10 times worse. Every evening I'd stop by her room and raised my hand to knock. But for some reason, I couldn't and was worth assailant yet. They kept swearing that it was only the 3 of them. The idea that someone else with herself, whoever had dragged her into that haunted house, was still out there. Her scars, I whispered to myself and rubbed the back of my neck. They came from her own magic. How is that possible? It was the same question I'd asked myself every damn day. I'd never heard of someone's own magic scarring them. From the way Megan had reacted back before the night of the festival, her scars were far more extensive than mine. Then again, she was at the door and stared down at the bracelet on my wrist. She had to leave at some point today to get food, if nothing else. My phone ringing came from behind me. Hoping it was General Pierce with some damn news, I picked it up off my bed and answered without looking. Did she hurt anyone? A few bruises. She's sedated now. I dug the heel of my hand into my forehead
It had been almost a year since Mom had an episode. The last one hadn't been nearly as violent. If she remembered what she did, she'd hate herself for it.
Cody?
I'm here, I muttered. Do I need to be there when she wakes up?
With the past, seeing you will only confuse her, or potentially set her off again.
I trust your judgment. I always have. Call me when I'm able to visit again and let me know how she's doing. Please.
I will. Should I ask how you're doing?
No, I'm fine, I said in a rush.
I mean it, Cody Athers. If you need to call me, you call me. Understand?
Yes, ma'am. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. The stabbing pain that had started at the center of my forehead spread to my temples. Tossing my phone aside, I clutched my hands to my head and slid down the wall until I sat on the floor. Memories of Mom screaming each time she had to be told what happened to Dad hit me. Those first few months at the home had been beyond torture for both of us. I'd watched one of the strongest people I know die, and the other one succumb to grief on a level that led to madness. I'd been in bone-crushing pain for days while my wounds healed. I dragged my fingers through my hair, then curled in on myself even tighter, as if that would stop the memories from resurfacing. Rage I'd done my best to keep tucked away slipped through those cracks in the wall. With it came pain I wasn't ready to deal with. Not now. I'd been too young back then to do anything to help my parents. I'd been helpless. And here I was, helpless once again, but with Megan. The scars on my back flared and I sucked in a hiss of air, scrambling to get away from the wall. I wound up in the middle of the floor, clenching and unclenching my hands while I stared at some random spot on the wall. I was in control, not my emotions. I was in control. I would not lose it. Not here, and not on a job. Not when I was meant to be protecting Megan. Get a fucking grip, I grunted to myself. The floor outside my door creaked. I blinked and finally looked away from the wall. My room was dark. Night had fallen once again without me noticing. Gods, I was getting worse, just like Megan was. My back and ass had gone numb at some point from sitting on the hard floor for so long without moving. The creaking in the hall came again, as if someone stood on the other side of the door. Was it Jack? He never hovered like that. Biting back a grimace from the stiffness in my limbs, I made it to my feet. With one hand I reached for the door. The other went to the enchanted blade sheathed at my lower back under my shirt. I yanked open the door. The hallway was empty. There were no lights on in the apartment. From the looks of it, I was alone. A flicker of movement near the front door caught my eye. A mostly translucent figure shimmered into sight. It turned its head to look right at me. An icy touch slithered down my spine. Dad? The figure passed through the front door. I stared after him for a solid 5 seconds, then bolted through the apartment and out into the corridor. The ghostly image had made it to the stairwell, and I gave chase. I told myself it wasn't Dad. It wasn't possible. I couldn't get myself to stop following it, needing to know what I was seeing, needing to understand. I followed the ghost outside the dorms and across the grounds. It looked like it was headed for the trees. Then it was just gone. The hell? I turned one way, then the other, but there was nothing out there. You were losing it, I scolded myself. Fuck, Cody, what are you doing to yourself? The scars on my back burned. I gritted my teeth against the pain and turned to go back inside. Curses fell from my mouth. I flinched back, not believing what stood barely a foot away from me. His face was half gone, as it had been when he died. His clothing was torn and tattered, and more grisly wounds covered his torso. His right arm was missing below the elbow. Half of his mouth was still visible, curved into a wicked smile that I'd never seen on his face before. He reached out a hand for me, and my dad's voice whispered in my mind. Cody, look what you did to me, Cody. I stumbled away. This isn't real. You're not real, I whispered. Do you really think you can protect anyone? You couldn't even protect your family. His ghost slammed into me, and I fell to all fours on the grass. The campus around me flickered in and out of sight. Glimpses of the attack that ruined my family appeared. I dug my hands into the earth, searching for control. It did nothing to stop the horrors that appeared before me. Me with my parents at one of the smaller Talon outposts while the first snowfall of the season came. A shout of alarm after the front gate was blown open. Fire. There was so much fire. The ground quaking while my parents rushed to face the attack. The woman who'd rushed them, a spirit summoner, had been strong. So damn strong. And she hadn't been alone. I watched my parents hit the ground and not get back up. I slipped past the Talons guarding me and rushed out there to save them. I held my own for less than 30 seconds. The woman's vicious cackle sounded again. She raised her hands ready to finish me off, but Dad had regained consciousness. He threw himself at the woman. His strength had been sapped, and his magic hardly came to his call. But he fought right up till the bitter end. He was the reason Mom and I had lived. The images faded, but my body reacted as if I was in that moment still. The ground quaked beneath me. I pushed myself upright and made it to my feet. Blindly, I wandered across the grounds, catching more glimpses of the bloody aftermath of the attack. Seeing Dad's lifeless body being dragged off me and Mom. How she hadn't come to until the next day. How both our wounds had festered from the spirit attacks. Hearing the Talons tell Mom that my dad was dead. I walked and walked, keeping my hands fisted and doing what I could to control my summoning. I wouldn't lose it. Not here. Not again. Without knowing where I was headed, I walked. Walls surrounded me, and there were shelves of books. I found the small corner of the library where I'd spent so many evenings with Megan. Of course I'd come here. I stalked around the space, trying to think of anything other than the attack. But images of Dad's dead body kept appearing. Mom's screams were a constant echo in my ears, and every damn scar on my back was on fire. I was breathing harshly. I couldn't get myself to calm down. Faintly, I heard footsteps approaching. That had to be in my head, too. Then a familiar hand slipped into mine, pulling me to a stop. Another firm touch held my cheek. "Look at me," a voice said softly. "Cody, look at me." I focused on those hands and the humming of magic that came with them. I knew that magic. I knew those touches. Bit by bit, I pushed the past aside. My blurred vision cleared, and there was Megan standing in front of me. Her worried eyes searched my face. The stones around us continued to tremble from my rampaging emotions, but the longer I stared into Megan's eyes and let her hold me, the more I was able to regain control of my magic. "You're here," I whispered. "I'm here," she assured me. "I'm right here." The last of the memories slipped away like water. My eyes were clear. I squeezed Megan's hand, holding mine. She was real. I wasn't sure why, but for a second I had feared she was another weird, messed up hallucination. But she was here. "Why?" I blurted roughly. She smiled sadly up at me. I wanted nothing more than to rid her of that sorrow, though I still had no idea what caused it. "The truth," she replied, and I stilled. "You were right. It's real for me, and I can't—" I captured her mouth, cutting her off with a kiss that made the walls tremble again. She dragged me closer, taking control of the moment. It had been a week since I'd kissed her. A week was too damn long. I buried one hand in her hair, and the other pressed against her lower back. She whispered my name, and I deepened the kiss, wanting to stay right here in this moment for as long as possible. She walked me backwards until my knees hit the edge of the couch. Not letting the kiss stop, I sank onto the cushions, pulling her with me. A voice in my head worried this wasn't real. Her body molded to mine, and I stopped caring if this was real or a dream.
Chapter 6. Meg. Cody and I sat on the couch in the library. My legs were in his lap, and we sat facing each other, close enough we could inch forward and kiss every now and then. He was playing with my hair, running his fingers through the loose locks with a ghost of a smile on his lips. His other hand rested on my thigh. This was the most comfortable I'd been in so long. Gods, I'd missed being around him. I'd woken up with the strangest urge to leave my room after having another damn dream of Cody and me together. I thought I'd woken up because my stomach had been growling, too. I hadn't eaten anything today. I'd grabbed my cardigan and set out for the dining hall. They always had food in the fridges and in the pantry for students to take at any hour, since many of us didn't exactly keep to normal sleeping schedules. I'd just reached the main building. Then the rumbling had started in the stones. It had come in waves. I'd followed where it led all the way to the library and down to where Cody and I had hung out together, and there he'd been, pacing like he was losing his mind. I'd moved toward him without a thought. He'd been there for me all the times I'd lost it. I wasn't about to let him be alone. I'd taken his hand and realized there was no point in hiding from the truth. Not anymore. Cody shifted closer and pressed his lips to mine again.
How did you know where I was?
I followed the shaking. I traced the curve of his cheek, then up to the lines of his furrowed brow. What happened? Against my thigh, his hand tensed. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, I said in a rush, but he shook his head.
I already lied to you about why I was here. I don't want to keep any more secrets from you.
Guilt turned my stomach, seeing as I still had so many secrets of my own. He turned away from me and stared off into the shadows of the library.
My parents ran a special unit of the Talons. They were Earth Summoners and damn good at what they did. Their main job was to train and assign Talons to be bodyguards for the summoners who needed extra protection.
His gaze darkened.
I'm sure you can imagine they made quite a few enemies.
The stone walls quaked. It wasn't as bad as it had been before, but I moved closer all the same and held his hand, hoping it'd help keep him calm. He drew me against himself and sighed.
I was 13 when the attack happened,
he went on, barely loud enough for me to hear.
This woman had been furious that my parents stopped her assassination attempt on one of the masters. I never got the full story and honestly didn't care to. She came after them at one of the Talon outposts. I was there. I saw it all.
He swallowed hard, and I wrapped my arms around him, reminding him he wasn't alone.
My parents went down, and I tried to help, but I didn't stand a chance against a summoner like her. She would have killed Mom and me, but Dad threw himself in front of that blast of power.
He shut his eyes, but tears slipped from them all the same. Softly, I wiped them away.
Dad died that day, and Mom was broken. For 12 years, she's been living in a home for wounded summoners. I spent a few years with her there too, in the beginning. After she was told Dad died, she screamed for days. Then she went silent. She hardly talks at all now. Some days she hasn't even realized time has passed. She thinks I'm still a teenager.
I'm so sorry. I hugged him even tighter. When he'd said he had a past of his own, scars of his own, I hadn't imagined they'd come from something as horrendous as watching his parents be attacked like that.
It was a long time ago.
He was back to running his fingers through my hair. It seemed to soothe him. Slowly, it hit me that he was doing it in counts of 5. He'd start at the top of my head and reach the ends by the count of 5. Then he'd start over.
I joined the Talons as soon as I was old enough. Decided to take the same path they had.
I'd say you're doing them proud so far. He smiled.
I'm trying.
What upset you tonight? Just remembering? I sat up straighter. Shit, was it because of me? Corey, I'm sorry if it was.
Wasn't you,
he assured me.
I got a phone call from the doctor looking after Mom. She had an episode today and lashed out. Hard not to dwell on the past after hearing that.
He blinked a few times, then looked at me curiously.
How did you know?
I told you I followed the shaking stones.
No, I mean, how did you know that I needed you?
My cheeks grew hot and I cleared my throat. I'm not sure, honestly. I was sleeping, having a dream about something, and I woke up needing to leave my room. It was weird, but I just had to get out for a little while. I was walking toward the dining hall to get something to eat while I was up, and I felt the stones shaking.
A dream about something, huh?
A smile danced over his lips. Yes, something. He leaned in, and with his lips so close to mine, whispered, Was it about us? Because that's all I've been dreaming about for weeks. His admission warmed me all the way to my damn toes. I was sure my entire body was flushed right then, and right on the heels of how much I wanted Cody was knowing that it wasn't fair to keep secrets from him. Not any longer. I'd been debating what to do all week. It was why I had avoided him. He said he'd wait for me to realize the truth, but I'd realized it that damn day. I was just too scared to embrace what I felt for him. As soon as I did, I put us both in line for dealing with way more than either of us should have to deal with. And after what he'd just told me about his parents, How could I put him through anything else? Don't do that, he whispered, gently lifting my chin with his knuckle. I see you trying to talk yourself out of whatever you want to say to me and walking away from this. I said nothing. As soon as I opened my mouth, the truth, all of it, would come spilling out. I started to pull back, but his arms were around me too fast. Why are you afraid of this? He asked. I don't want to hurt you. I trust you, he whispered. You shouldn't. My hands fell into the space between us, and I couldn't get myself to meet his gaze. I'm not who you think I am. My last name isn't right. It's Villasaurus. Villasaurus? He repeated. But that family died out ages ago. Damn, I shouldn't have been surprised he knew the name. It was a lie spread to make everyone think we no longer exist, but we do. Well, a few of us do, anyway. If there's more, I don't know about them. It's just my parents and me. That's why you can summon all 5 elements. No, I can't, I snapped bitterly. I can't do anything with my magic. But I saw you inside the haunted house. I pushed off his lap and made it to my feet. I wasn't going to leave, but being so close to him, letting him comfort me while I told him the truth, I didn't deserve that. I don't have control over my magic. I never have, I told him. From the time I was old enough to understand what I was, I've been told that if anyone were to find out what I could do, I'd become a target. That's what happened to most of my extended family, apparently, and everyone who came before us. A lot of them were killed for what they could do. So, growing up, any time I started to use magic, I was reminded of everyone who died. I was taught to shove my power down as deep as I could and pretend it didn't exist. Why would they do that to you? That's borderline torture, telling a summoner not to use their gifts once they've been realized, Cody said, scooting to the edge of the couch. Then his brow furrowed. Wait, your parents use magic, don't they? They do. They were trained to use one element of their choice. But they watched my mom's family die in an attack years before I was born. By the time I came along, they'd decided that to keep me safe, they wouldn't ever let me use magic. Cowards, that's all they are. The truth had hit me a few years ago. That was the reason my parents refused to use their magic to its full extent. They were so terrified all the time of being found out that they ignored the gifts they'd been given. They could have shown the world who they were. They could have done so much good. Yeah, it would have been dangerous, but people seemed to find out who we were, no matter how hard we kept our secret. I've been terrified all my life, I confessed. Terrified of strangers, of accidentally letting my magic be seen. It's why coming here had been such a horrible idea. Why did they bring you to the academy? To keep me out of the way, I scoffed. I'm a problem child to them. Every now and then my magic finds a way out. It's stronger than theirs, so it's not as easy to ignore. It causes havoc every time, and I get in trouble. What happened 3 years ago doesn't help. I risked raising my head. Cody's eyes flickered to my arms, as if seeing the scars hidden beneath the sleeves of my cardigan. You said your magic hurt you. How? It's what happens when you don't learn how to use it once you recognize it's there, when you don't let it out, I whispered. When you let it become stronger than your willpower. I pulled the cardigan tighter around me and crossed my arms. I never went through a choosing ceremony like everyone else. From the second I was born, all 5 elements were there waiting for me to embrace them. But I was forced to turn away. And bad shit happens when you do that. Meg, what happened 3 years ago? He asked softly. If I tell you, you'll take back everything you've said to me. Says who? You will, trust me. And I don't know if I can handle having you look at me like I'm a killer. Cody stood up and came toward me. He took hold of my elbows and leaned down to look me right in the eye. I swear to you, I won't. The sensation of his hands holding me like this almost caused me to step into his arms and let him comfort me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I stepped out of his reach and took a breath. I met this girl at some function for the council and their advisors. Her name was Raven. She was funny, and we became friends. She was one of the few I've ever had. She had overbearing parents too, or that was what she'd made me believe. When my hands started to shake, I shoved them in the cardigan pockets to hide them. One night, she asked if I could sneak out to go to this party. I was stupid. I'd just gotten another scolding from my parents for pushing back against their rules of no magic. So I snuck away and met up with Raven. Only it wasn't a party, and she hadn't wanted to be my friend. I shut my eyes, and the warehouse was right there waiting for me. I cursed under my breath, and Cody's hand brushed against my arm. Not ready for that just yet, I backed up more. I'd rather he not be holding me once he understood how terrible of a person I was. I didn't want that to be the last thing I felt from him, disappointment and disgust, while he let me go and walked away. Meg? I took a deep breath and went on with a night that fucked up my life. Raven was part of a family who'd hated mine for generations. Apparently we did something to them, and I don't know, I stopped listening after they chained me up. They? He asked, his voice quaking along with the stones around us. She was there with a bunch of others. They were all wearing black robes. The only other person I recognized was her brother, Remus. I'd only met him a few times. He and Raven had played me for a fool. They thought I'd be the easiest target since I didn't have magic. Their plan, I started, then stopped after my stomach felt as if it were going to revolt. Their plan was to kidnap me and use me to lure my parents in. They thought I had no magic. My scars gave a twinge. There was no turning back, not now. They started messing with me, beating on me, I whispered, and the walls began to shake even more. I told them to stop, warned them to let me go, but they didn't listen. I felt my magic building, and then it was too late. It exploded out of me, attacking everyone that was there. I tried to contain it, but that only made it turn on me, too. When it was over, everyone in that warehouse was dead. I'm not sure how I survived. I was found a few hours after. I woke up a week later and was told the threat was ended because I'd killed them all. I pulled my hands from my pockets. I didn't want to hide from him, not anymore. Slowly, I removed the cardigan. All I had on underneath was a tank top. The scars that Cody had glimpsed at my wrists were now fully visible. They ran up each arm, a thicker one that had smaller ones spiderwebbing off of it. They met at my collarbones, then split, traveling down my chest and over my shoulders, following my spine. I kept my eyes focused on the floor, though I sensed Cody's eyes on me. After the incident, my parents were more concerned about someone else finding out our secret. I was scolded, then tucked away under heavy guard until they believed I'd learned my lesson about getting close to anyone. They don't care that I almost died, or that I killed all those people. They don't care about anything. The rest of the words became lost under a gasp while I told myself not to cry, but I hated them. I hated them so much for blaming me for everything. The stress of the last 3 years burst free, and there was no stopping it. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I covered my face with my hands. Words. "I've got you now," Cody whispered and kissed the top of my head. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. I'll stand." He didn't seem to care. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed someone simply to be there for me, like Cody. I had no idea how long we stayed there. After a while, the tears stopped. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Which part?" "I'm dangerous, Cody. I killed people." His eyes darkened. "The fact that your parents blame you is beyond insane." I started to look away, but he turned me. "I still think that was a fluke. Or you were in more control than you thought," he suggested. "Fair warning, because I see the gears turning in your head. I'm not magic. How would they react if they found out we were together?" "What else has you so worried?" Cody asked. "My parents have 3 main rules, and I've just broken all of them with you," I explained. "Don't use magic. If they find out you're more than my bodyguard, that I told you the truth, they'll lose it." "Are you planning on telling them?" "What? No." "What are we going to do then, huh?" "How about we worry about dealing with life one day at a time? You make it sound so easy. He shrugged, then hugged me. I wrapped my arms around him too. Right now, my only concern is making sure you're okay. No more locking yourself in your room. No more hiding. Not from me. I should have said no. I should have reminded myself why this was a horrible, terrible, going to end badly idea. But I couldn't. He was right. We take our lives one day at a time. I had someone who wanted to be with me despite the chaotic mess my life was. For now, I'd let myself enjoy being with Cody and see where it took us. Maybe when it came time for me to leave academy, I'd finally be brave enough to tell my parents to shove it. I stared up into Cody's eyes and smiled. So, I mused, plucking at his t-shirt. Were you wanting to turn in for the night, or did you want to hang out for a while down here? He kissed me in answer, and we were back on the couch in a blink. By the way, I said between kisses, I'm here for you too, you know, if you ever need to talk. You have no idea how much you've helped me already, without even knowing, he whispered sincerely. No idea. He smoothed his hands down my arms. I bit my lip, loving the sensation of his rough palms on skin I hadn't let anyone touch in 3 years. I crushed my mouth to his and decided spending Saturday night in the library with Cody was better than any dream I could have come up with. Chapter 7. Cody. After walking Megan to her room for what remained of the night, I trudged up the stairs to my apartment. It was nearly 4 a.m. I hadn't even paid attention to the time passing by until she glanced at the clock on the wall. The night might have started out shitty, but it ended on a good note for us both. A Villasaurus, I whispered once I was in my room and sitting up in bed. I'd heard about them a long time ago. Just like everyone else, though, I'd believed they were fiction now. Yet there was one living 2 floors below me. It was crazy to think about, but now I had answers. I leaned my head back against the wall and shut my eyes. At first, all I saw was Megan's smiling face. Then her scars appeared, and I balled up my hands on my knees. I'd never seen scars like that. They were deeper than I'd first assumed, and there were far more than I'd expected. While we'd sat down there on that couch, simply holding each other, I'd asked if they bothered her. She said only when the weather was changing or when she had a panic attack. I sat up and raised my shirt to give her a view of my back. It was only fair, after all, that she see my scars too. It had taken a weight off I hadn't realized I'd been carrying up till that moment. She gently pressed her hand to the center of my back. I'd relaxed at her touch, failing to remember when the last time was that someone had touched me there. Dr. Jillian might have been right after all. With Megan, I'd be able to face my past, and all that came with it. One day. She traced the lines of the tattoo that also covered my entire back, musing aloud about why I chose it. The massive dragon had its wings tucked in its back, and its tail curled up and around my side to my ribs. Its eyes were emerald, and its scales were varied shades of green to blue to black. I told her about all the stories my dad had told me growing up about dragons and how they fiercely protected those they cared for. The tattoo was my tribute to him. On our way back to her room, I'd asked her what set her off in the woods the other night. She'd paled and murmured that for a horrible second, she'd seen ravens standing behind me like a ghost. She said it was probably some messed up hallucination shit because she'd been so stressed out since the festival, and I'd quietly agreed with her. Telling her that I'd seen the ghost of my dad probably wouldn't go over well. Whatever I'd seen had to be in my head too. That's what I told myself. The last thing either of us needed was to believe we were seeing ghosts. I had enough to worry about ensuring she was safe, and she was dealing with the shit her parents had given her over the haunted house incident. How could they blame her for something that wasn't her fault? How could they never let her use the magic she was born with? It was a part of her, and they forced her to keep it tucked away as if she wasn't a summoner at all. Furious at how they'd treated her, I couldn't sit still. I climbed off my bed and went to stare out the window. Megan was hurting, and her parents couldn't care less. If I ever came face to face with them, I'd be ripping them a new one for how they'd treated her. Yeah, and then what? You heard Megan.
What are you going to do once they pull her from academy? The notion of not seeing Megan again caused the stone walls to shake around me. I muttered a curse and rubbed the back of my neck. It didn't matter. If they tried to take her, hide her away, I'd come after her. An image of Megan and me living in a tiny cottage of our own slammed into me. What was stopping us from doing just that? You've only known each other a few months. Don't get ahead of yourself. But nothing I did jarred the idea loose. I became fixated on it. I'd never felt for anyone as I did for Megan. My heart pounded thinking of spending the rest of our lives together. I didn't need to wait another month or year to know I wanted to be with her. She had such a caring soul, even after all she'd been through. Tonight I'd seen a glimpse of who she could be once she'd let herself free of the past. One day at a time, I reminded myself, and gripped the edge of the windowsill. One day at a time, there's still a threat to deal with. After hearing about the warehouse in Raven, the message left on our wall last month made far more sense. It heightened my concern that this mysterious fourth summoner knew who Megan really was. The 3 we'd taken into custody might have been telling the truth after all. They could have no idea who this person was. It had to be the same person who attacked her inside the haunted house. And I let him slip away, I muttered darkly. Whoever was after Megan wouldn't get to her, not a second time. I'd protect her from any threat, even if it came from her parents. I wasn't sure how much time I had, but I'd come up with a plan to see that she had the life she deserved, that she had a chance to be herself and happy. No one was going to hurt Megan ever again, not while I was still standing. I draped my arm around Megan's shoulders and stared down at her. It was Saturday evening and we'd just enjoyed a long stroll around the grounds. Twice. What? She asked through a laugh. You've been giving me this goofy look all week. Goofy, huh? Yeah, she said, standing on her toes to kiss my cheek. Goofy. What have you been thinking about? Can't I simply be happy that my girlfriend has been happy? Megan's eyes lit up. After our long night in the library, it was like I'd woken up the next morning with this new energy inside me. I was going to make every day count. Megan had seemed to have the same idea. There were still moments when I'd catch that lingering fear in her glance. Or being around so many people was too much for her. I, too, had instances of letting the past seep into my day. But just like how I sensed when she was about to have a panic attack, she seemed to know when all I needed was her hand in mine to remind me where I was. I was happy. No, more than happy. I was living again. Almost 2 weeks had gone by and they'd been her being out there somewhere, yes. Was I pissed that we had yet to figure out who he was, or if... You know, I could totally go for some epic couch snuggling tonight, she murmured with a worms. Winter break was fast approaching, which meant more time for us to hang out together and not have... There was something else on her mind, though. She looked like she wanted to ask me something these last few days. The kiss was slow and filled with the growing affection we had for each other. I held her to me, letting my touch say everything I still had yet to find the words for. We stayed on that landing far longer than I intended. We didn't break apart until a couple of students when the sight of her freckles was too much. I kissed one cheek, then the other, and ended at her lip for a moment with a shimmering golden light. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed it in these last 2 weeks. It had to be from her magic. Bringing it up might make her think she was going to lose control. Ever going to start using her magic? That time had to be now, when she wasn't so bogged down. What happened? I asked. Nyala glanced at us over her shoulder.
I'm not sure. He texted me and said he saw something he couldn't explain.
It's not possible, Jack whispered roughly. It's not. I approached and stood behind Nyala. Jack? He looked up at me. His face was pale and he kept wringing his hands. Sparks ignited at his fingertips, like he was about to lose control of his summoning. My parents, Jack whispered. I saw my parents. He swallowed hard and squeezed Nyala's hands. They're dead, but I saw them. I don't understand. Shit. For 2 weeks there'd been no weird pasts. But if Jack was seeing his dead parents, well, that changed everything.
Chapter 8. Meg. Jack went back to staring at the floor and shaking his head. He looked more than spooked. From the way he was reacting, his parents hadn't died in the best of circumstances. But why had he seen them? Was it just a coincidence that he'd seen them after I'd seen Raven so recently? I turned to Cody, a question on my lips, but it vanished at the look on his face. He'd gone still, and there was the slightest hint of a crease in his forehead. There was a tremor in his hands, too. Cody?
It has to just be in my head, right?
Jack said before Cody spoke up.
A weird flashback or something?
He offered up a shaky smile.
I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. I've been studying too much. Not sleeping again or something.
Niall looked far from convinced. If you're sure you're okay.
I am, it's fine. Sorry,
Jack said to Cody and me.
Didn't mean to worry anyone.
He stood up and told us they were going to go grab something to eat in the dining hall if we wanted to join them later. Cody said we'd probably be down soon enough. What's wrong? I asked the second we were alone.
What do you mean?
He mentioned seeing his dead parents, and your magic feels ready to start making the place shake. I nodded to his hands. He curled them into fists. That didn't stop the walls from beginning to quake. I know you're my bodyguard and everything, but you're also my boyfriend. I'd really like us not to keep secrets from each other. Not anymore. When he remained silent as the stones he manipulated, I took his fist between my hands and moved to stand right in front of him. His magic rose to touch me, then settled back down just beneath the surface of his skin. I uncurled his fist and twined our fingers together. Cody, talk to me.
The night you found me freaking out, I saw my dad.
You what?
Dr. Jillian called me about Mom, and I sat in my room for hours fighting off the memories. Then I heard someone outside my door, and I opened it.
He raised his hand, mimicking opening a door as if he was seeing that night again.
He was standing right there, by the front door.
He gave me a brief rundown of what happened next. I understood better now why he'd lost it that night. It was just like how I'd seen Raven in the woods. But I'd killed her. Why was he seeing his dad? And now Jack had seen his dead parents? I don't understand what's going on, I murmured. Why us three? Cody squeezed my hand, and the stones around us rumbled before settling.
I don't know.
But you have an idea? He started to turn away, but I gently held his cheek so he couldn't. You think this has something to do with that fourth summoner, right?
It's possible, but if that's true, how did he know to make you see Raven? And if these are illusions and not ghosts called back from beyond the veil, how would he know what to make you see? And why go this far when the other three didn't?
I had no answers for him. From the way he studied my face, he was waiting to see my reaction. He had a point, one I hadn't even stopped to consider. How had this person known to show me Raven? I killed everyone in the warehouse that night. I know I did. Someone who knew the truth of that night must have talked. That was the only way any of this made sense. Quickly, my thoughts began to spiral. The shit I'd dealt with a few weeks ago hadn't affected only me. But what if I was still the main target? What if this person, the reason why he hadn't been caught that night, was because he wasn't brought there by the same assholes who'd hired the other summoners? What if he'd only come for me? Meg, Cody said sternly, though his touch on my arm was tender.
Don't go there. Not yet. We have no idea what's going on.
How do you know what I'm even thinking? I whispered.
Because I know you.
He ran his hands up my arms, soothing the scars that had begun to prickle in agitation.
I don't know anything for certain yet, but I do need to ask you something. I need you to be honest with me.
What do you want to know?
What was the last name of the family who attacked you? Raven and her brother. Remus, was it?
Yeah. The name they gave me was Gorgrithus, but I have no idea if that was their actual name.
It's a place to start. That's all I need.
You think this goes back to that night? The moment I'd asked it, I knew why. The message on my wall with the dead raven nailed to it. Shit, I'd hoped it was a coincidence those assholes used that bird. Panic built, and I gulped. You don't think...
I'm merely being cautious, that's it, he assured me. Breathe, Meg. You're all right. I've got you.
I knew he did, too, and that was what worried me so damn much.
Why don't we go join the others? Get some food,
Cody suggested. The distraction tactic, huh? I have no idea what you're talking about. Holding my hand, he pulled me after him to the door. So much for a quiet evening hanging out together. I kept my complaint to myself. A couple of hours later, while I laughed along with Nyala and Briar, who joined us with Zach, I was glad Cody had made us come down. Even Cody was having a good time of it. Jack and Zach kept giving him intrigued smiles each time he laughed. They'd look at him, then look at me, and exchange a knowing grin. At one point, Jack caught me watching them and gave me a subtle thumbs up. It looked like I wasn't the only one Nyala and her friends had been worried about at the start of the semester. I worried about Jack throughout our little get-together, but whatever freak-out he'd had upstairs seemed to have passed. He showed no outward signs that he'd just witnessed his dead parents wandering around campus. Maybe we were all overreacting. When I started to yawn, Cody stood up and held out his hand for mine. I told the others good night, and we had a leisurely walk back to my room. The corridor was on the busier side tonight. I planned to invite Cody inside long enough for a proper goodnight kiss. Then I glanced down the corridor, and the air went out of my lungs. I dug my fingers into Cody's arm. He said my name, but I couldn't get my mouth to work. There, standing in the arched doorway leading to the stairwell, was Raven. Her ghostly figure beckoned to me with that creepy smile stretching her lips. I blinked, and she was gone. Fumbling behind me, I unlocked my door, dragged Corey inside, and he closed it behind us. I was in his arms without saying a damned word. "What's happening?" I whispered. Cody hugged me tighter. I sensed everything he wanted to say in his touch. It was enough to remind me that no matter what craziness was going on now, I wasn't alone. I just hoped whoever decided to make me a target wouldn't wind up hurting Cody in the end. "What are we doing out here?" Cody asked. I stood with him outside one of the practice rings for the Earth Summoners. It had been a couple of days since Jack had seen his dead parents. During that time, I'd seen Raven in 3 different occurrences. None of them had lasted as long as the first time. She'd appear in a corridor or in the lecture halls. Last night, I'd spotted her in the dining hall. As much as I'd wanted to keep it a secret from Cody, I'd told him each time. And each time, he swore he wasn't going to let anyone hurt me. I knew that was the truth and appreciated it, but it hadn't stopped me from realizing how defenseless I'd been all this time, that I'd let my parents' fear stop me from doing so much. "I want your help with something," I told him, and stepped into the middle of the ring. "I want to start figuring out how to use my magic, just with one element," I said in a rush. "I've always felt the most connected to Earth, and you're so damn good at using it too, so I thought, maybe if I have you here to stop me from losing it, I could make it work, learn to control it." He did a slow walk around the entire ring, his face blank. I wondered if he was going to say it was too dangerous, or that I didn't need to learn since I had a bodyguard. Then he entered the ring and approached. "Close your eyes," he told me. "Relax your body and your mind." Relief washed through me, and I did as he said. For the next hour, Cody worked to help me find that quiet place in my mind. It was hard, especially in those first few minutes. It wasn't the chilliness in the air that kept dragging me out of the light meditative state he wanted me to reach. The voices of the students on the grounds distracted me. Were they talking about me? Wondering what I was doing out here? Wondering why I was even trying? The ground rumbled, and a wall of earth rose in a circle around Cody and me. It blocked out the noise, and he told me to close my eyes again. He guided me through breathing exercises and delving deeper into what made me, me. His rumbling voice was as soothing. I was able to sense the churning power inside of me. I felt the edges of the kiss difficult. Sweat beaded my forehead, and my hands shook. "Focus," Cody said softly. He'd moved to stand behind me. "You." His hands hovered over my arms, but he never touched me. "Don't forget to breathe." 5 streams of color swirl around and around within that internal cage. Green, yellow, red, blue, and white. He breathed loudly, and I mirrored him, steadying myself. We breathed in for a count of 5, then out for a count of 5. In and out of magic came to my call. It parted from the others and wound about my hand. A rush of strength slammed into me. I turned my hand toward the earth, pulling a single column of stone and dirt to stand inside the circle. "Meg," Open your eyes, Cody whispered. Oh! I gasped in shock and delight. A tower of stone stood before me, reaching high, vanished. I sagged, and Cody's arms were right there to keep me upright. I think that's enough for one day, he said softly. I spun around, kissed his cheek, and squeezed him as tightly as I could while he chuckled. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This was only day 1. You're really going to keep helping me? So yes, I'm going to keep helping you until you see what I see. Every seen some shit and is still trying to live. A person who helps remind me every day, too, that I survived and it's time I started living. I should have gone inside for the evening, but I didn't want to leave the tiny haven he'd created. He pulled me how I was ever going to be without Cody. Was it too soon to be thinking what I was? It had to be. And yet the longer I stood there with him, not having to say a word, thin wall. Dinner? Dinner, I agreed. He pulled me to his side, and I knew from that moment, even if my parents found out about Cody, even if they tried to keep us apart, I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to let them control my life any longer. I turned my thoughts inward, reaching for my source of power. I would find a way to use my power. All of it. I was going to pave my own way forward. And that, Chapter 9. Cody.
Pull back, I told Megan sternly.
I've got it. I'm fine.
I ground my teeth and breathed. The 3 columns Megan had managed to raise so far shook. Her hold over them waned with each passing second. For the past week, we'd been spending a few hours together in the evening working on her summoning. She was doing far better than I'd anticipated, but it was still a challenge. She'd gone to bed exhausted every night. Since she'd neglected her magic for so long, she was having to essentially start from nothing when it came to using it, and having command over it. A few times she'd been close to having panic attacks. I'd helped her through each one, and she'd gone right back to practicing. Though she was indeed making progress, she had a long way to go. A very long way. And unlike me, she was proving not to be the most patient student. Meg, enough. I tried again.
I said I'm fine.
She raised her hand higher, attempting to pull a 4th column of stone from the earth. I sensed her reach her limit a second before her arm faltered, and the stones toppled to the ground. She stumbled, but I was right there to keep her upright. How about you listen to me before you hurt yourself? I scolded. She rolled her eyes, but made no move to push herself away from me. The faint golden glow that had been appearing each time she used her magic now faded.
I hate how long this is taking.
Seriously? It's been less than a week.
And I should be better than this.
Says who? That time she did shove me away and stomped to the other end of the training circle. I never should have told you, I muttered.
What does that have to do with anything?
I crossed my arms and stared her down. So you're going to tell me that my seeing the ghost of my dead dad yesterday isn't why you're pushing yourself so hard today? I'd seen him twice, but that was beside the point. She kicked at a small rock on the ground and shrugged. You can't rush yourself, not with magic like what you have, I reminded her.
It's just not fair to you.
What's not?
You're able to protect me, but I'm still too useless to do the same for you.
The ground rumbled beneath my feet, and I stomped to her. You are not useless. Stop saying shit like that.
Why? It's true.
She turned and went to the wall I'd erected for privacy in the training circle. She started to raise her hand toward it, then let it fall.
I'm done for the day. Lower the wall.
No.
Cody, come on.
No. If you want to leave, lower the wall yourself.
You just lectured me about pushing myself too hard.
I shrugged and crossed my arms. You're right, I did. So how about you stand there for a minute and listen to what I've been saying to you all along? Maybe this time it'll click. She refused to turn around and face me. You do protect me, I said softly. You have been for weeks now. You've seen what it's like for me when I lose control, when I let that darkness back in. The only reason I'm able to be here to protect you is because you're doing that for me. When she still didn't turn around, I sighed and went to her. Taking hold of her shoulder, I spun her around. Her eyes were downcast, and her lips were screwed up to the side like they were when she was overthinking. One of these days, I have no doubt you'll be able to use your magic to kick my ass. For now, let me do what I've been trained to do and protect you. I raised her chin, and her eyes flicked up to meet my gaze. And that means stopping you from pushing yourself too hard where you hurt yourself. I fumbled over my next words, but managed to mumble, I care for you, you know? A lot. And I'd prefer it if my girlfriend wouldn't be so hell-bent on being a stubborn, impatient pain in my... Megan threw herself at me. I caught her. Our lips met, and I staggered into the wall behind me. She kissed me like we were the only two people on campus. I was damn glad I'd kept the wall up a little longer. When she broke away, she was grinning. What are you so happy about now? I asked. You and me. And this? She kissed me again, pressing her entire body into mine. I grumbled, fisting my hands in the back of her sweater. Her stomach growled, and I laughed. Come on, I said, raising my hand and returning the wall to the earth. You need food. I need lots of things, but food's a good start. I draped my arm over her shoulders, and we stepped out of the practice ring. She reached up and held my hand while we walked. It was during moments like these that I was almost able to forget that she was a Vilosaurus, and I was her bodyguard. I could almost forget there was another person out there potentially biding his time to attack. Almost. There was something I needed to talk to her about today. I hadn't wanted to do it before she started her summoning practice for the day in case it threw her off. I'd given the name Gorgothus to Luke and Nick in hopes they'd be able to give me more information on the family who'd gone after Megan. So far, they had turned up nothing. There was a brief history on the family. According to the records, they used to hold prominent seats on the advisors board and had a few council members here and there over the years. They'd been loud voices when it came to magical laws. Other than that, there wasn't anything of significance. And as far as the Pierce brothers could tell, there were no remaining summoners belonging to the Gorgothus family. They'd up and disappeared 3 years ago. Hearing that hadn't sat well with me. There was a link between whoever had left that message for Megan and that family. There had to be. Either someone survived that night and Megan hadn't known it, or they'd told someone about their plan. I'd wanted to have Megan tell the Pierce brothers about that night. There was always a chance they'd catch some detail that I'd missed. Putting her through that emotional roller coaster again, though, wasn't something I wanted to do. I wasn't going to make her tell them. It wasn't merely about her being attacked. If she told them, she'd be one step closer to letting them know what she was, too. Why had her parents ever thought that keeping this all a secret was the best way to keep her safe, to keep any of them safe? Cody? Megan tugged my hand. The ground's shaking. Oh, shit, sorry. It's fine. What are you thinking about? Things I wish I didn't have to worry you with, I admitted. Is this about the name I gave you? I started to speak, but a massive eruption of fire exploded across the grounds, stealing the words from my mouth. The rising flames were quickly surrounded by a spirit shield. Not stopping to think, I took off at a run, telling Megan to stay behind me, unsure of what we were about to rush into. The spirit summoning circle, surrounded by willow trees, was engulfed in flames, held back by a spirit shield. Other students had gathered, pointing and calling out in alarm. Megan stayed right by my side while we watched on. I took a step forward, unsure if I should attempt to get closer. Then the flames parted, and 2 figures emerged. Briar and Zach were at the heart of the flames. His hands were aimed out toward the shield. She was on her knees with flames pouring out of her hands. His lips moved like he was speaking to her. Little by little, the fire drew back and fizzled out altogether. Zach lowered the shield and sank to the ground in front of her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she continued to stare straight ahead, pale and shaky. What happened? I asked after I'd reached them, Megan still with me. Xylon. Zach spat, and I cursed. She saw Xylon's ghost. It set her off. He leaned back and cupped Briar's face. I need you to look at me, Bri. Look at me. He didn't move an inch. He whispered to her softly, and finally her eyes flicked to his. Zach? She blinked, and then she was apologizing and checking him over as if looking for burns. He held her hands and hugged her again. I'm fine. Everyone's fine. I got the shield up in time. You moron, she snapped. I could have hurt you. You never will. How many times have I told you that, huh? At their exchange, I couldn't help but look at Megan. She wasn't the only summoner on campus who worried about her abilities. If Briar and Zach had made it work, we would too. I trusted her just as Zach trusted Briar. One of these days, she'd figure that out.
I swear I saw him, Briar muttered. He was right there. He was going to try and kill you again. Shit.
She clung to Zach. Fire sparked at her fingertips, but there wasn't another fireball eruption. He's dead, Zach told her. He's dead and he's not coming back. He helped her to her feet and guided her toward the main building. Since they were faculty, they had an apartment there instead of in the dorms. The students who'd gathered drifted away. Megan asked. He was a necromancer, I told her quietly. He's the reason this campus was destroyed not too long ago. Zach and Briar are the main reason he was defeated. He killed a lot of people, destroyed Briar's family, and almost took Zach from her. Megan's hand slipped into mine, and I held it.
Why is this happening? First me, then you. Jack and Briar now? Who's next?
And simply keeping quiet as they had about the stalker notes. We'll figure this out. Damage her Fire could have done if he hadn't been around to throw up a spirit shield. She'd made would amount to nothing. She'd turn inward, and I doubted I'd ever get her to trust herself again. She'd run away from everyone, including me. I'd lose her. We should head inside, I murmured, squeezing Megan's hand. Get you some food before your stomach eats itself. I'm sure Nyala will go check on Briar and let us know how she's doing. I stayed by Megan's side the rest of the evening. We ate in the dining hall, then returned to my apartment to wait and hear any news from Nyala. But when Nyala and Jack entered a couple of hours later, she was pale and Jack looked pissed.
They were right there,
Nyala whispered while Jack sat her down on the couch. Real, you're all right. I promise you are. Nyala wrung her hands until Jack took them. He kissed the back of each one. 2 ribbons of fire stretched out from his palms to wrap around their hands and make their way slowly up her arms. She let out a heavy sigh and shut her eyes. Jack looked at me over his shoulder. His face was pinched in anger and worry. What the fuck is this shit? He whispered. Why do we keep seeing the dead? I don't know, I admitted. What I was beginning to suspect, I didn't say aloud. Whoever was causing us to see ghosts had targeted Megan and those around her. It appeared our mysterious 4th summoner wasn't finished with her yet, not even close. And now, he was going to go after all those closest to her. My job just became 100 times harder.
Chapter 10. Too distracted with my racing thoughts to decide what I was going to wear tonight. Winter break had finally arrived. I'd hoped to have these couple of weeks to de-stress and spend as much time as possible with Cody. Now, all I kept thinking about was how much worse the situation had and how everyone else had had their own ghostly encounters. Briar had seen Xylon a second time, and her dead father after that. Nyala kept becoming surrounded. Jack had to deal with his dead parents a few times too. Zach hadn't been spared either. He'd seen his dad and Xylon and several dead Talons. No idea why. Cody had gone to Hook to tell him about the situation. He believed that whoever was doing this might be the same person who'd locked me up in the haunted house. And the ghosts, though unsettling, had yet to be a real threat, aside from inciting near panic attacks in me and causing Briar to set off a fireball. The second forced to leave. So far, it had seemed to work. I couldn't get rid of the sinking feeling in my gut, though, that this wasn't over. And judging from how on edge Cody remained, he had the same thought. Which was why Nyala had insisted we join her and the others for a small Yule get-together in her apartment tonight. It was meant to be a festive evening. I supposed I did have something to celebrate. Well, 2 things. It wasn't as if I could share either with my parents if they had let me come to see them for the holiday, but they hadn't. That was fine with me. I'd rather not have to lie to their faces. Since Cody had been helping me work with my summoning, I'd finally been able to gain some confidence in being able to work with at least one element. My panic attacks had lessened each time I tapped into my magic, too. Having Cody around was a huge help in reminding me that I was safe. My scars still prickled, and the fear remained that one of these days I'd lose control again and add to the damage already done to myself. But that fear was less prominent than it had been a few weeks ago. If only my parents had understood that using my magic was the only way to live. not keep chucking it away and waiting for it to explode out of me. The cage I'd always imagined around my power had changed. There were no more intimidating bars trapping my magic. Now there was a swirling vortex of light, waiting for me to reach inside and take control of what had always been mine. We hadn't attempted to work with anything other than earth. Right now, dealing with one element was more than enough. It'd take me months, maybe longer, to be able to control it the way Cody did. And thankfully for me, he was indeed extremely patient. I looked over my clothes again and finally decided on a crimson sweater. I pulled it over my head. A knock came at the door a few minutes later. I opened it. "What's that? I thought we said no gifts." He shrugged and held it out to me. "I lied. Open it before we go to the party." I motioned for him to come into my room. He closed the door, then shoved his hands in his front pockets, that understated smile on his face while he looked at me. I shook the box, but nothing rattled inside it. His brow arched, and I stopped teasing him. The paper came off, and I removed the lid of the box. His cheeks. He cleared his throat, then stepped forward and lifted the charm out of the box. A silver chain. Dragons fiercely protect what they care for most. He unclasped the chain, and I turned so he could place it around my neck. It hung perfectly with the V-neck of my sweater. He laid his hands on my shoulders, then slipped his arms around me, hugging me. I thought, I don't know, with everything going on, that if for some reason I'm not right by your side when you need me, you've got something to hold on to until I can get there. It's stupid, I know, but I spun around and kissed him. Not stupid, I assured him. I love it. He traced the curve of my cheek, then leaned in and kissed me deeper and far longer. His hand slipped beneath my sweater at my back. He broke the kiss and started to pull his hand away with an apology, but I shook my head. Reaching around, I put his hand on my back and smiled. Cody had seen my scars, or most of them at least. I was no longer worried what he'd think when he touched them. In fact, feeling the hum of his magic through his palm sent a thrill straight through me. Our gazes locked, then I was kissing him like there was no tomorrow. His hand remained firmly planted against my back the entire time. We moved through to the room, and he sank on the edge of the bed, pulling me down with him. He laid back, and I sprawled atop him with a laugh. Our kisses became shorter, and eventually he sighed. "We should get to that party sometime tonight." "Are you sure?" Nyala was pretty insistent about us attending. I have a feeling if we don't get up there soon, she'll come looking for us. I pouted until Cody kissed me. That led to another heated moment that had his hands on my back again while he held me to him. I could have stayed there all evening and been perfectly content. He grumbled and sat up, bringing me with him. Then we were on our feet. I sighed but took his hand, and we left my dorm to go join our friends. The thought brought me to a halt in the middle of the empty corridor. Most students had gone home for the break, leaving the doors almost eerily empty. Friends. I had friends now, and a boyfriend. How had that happened? "Meg?" Tears pricked my eyes, but I wiped them away, trying not to let Cody see. It's nothing. I'm great. Let's go to that party." He hesitated. I stood on my toes and kissed his cheek. "Happy tears, promise," I whispered. I just realized how not alone I am. It's a nice feeling. Strange, but nice. "I know what you mean. Believe me." He pulled me into his arms for one more tight squeeze. Then we finally made our way upstairs to Nyala's apartment. She decorated the entire place from top to bottom with strands of garland. Snowflakes hovered in the air, frozen in time with the aid of her magic. Tiny orbs of spirit energy, shifting from blue to white to purple, swirled lazily through the air too. Music was playing. Food and drinks covered every available space in the small kitchen, and a huge stack of board games was by the coffee table, waiting to be played. Cody said he'd bring me a drink, and I was immediately pulled into hugs by both Nyala and Briar. Then there was happy chatter and laughter while we broke out the games and enjoyed the night together. Night fell. I got up to refill my drink and peered out the window. White flakes fluttered past the glass. A fine dusting already covered the grounds, causing them to glow. "It's snowing," I told everyone, and they paused the argument the guys had been having about how badly they were losing to Nyala, Briar, and me in a deck-building game. "Why is it snowing inside the mountain?" "That's what I asked my first year here," Briar said with a laugh.
Apparently, the mountain weather imitates the weather outside of it for the most part.
Then why do we never get thunderstorms?
She said for the most part.
Cody said, and I rolled my eyes.
I hear Hook has a soft spot for snow.
Nyala jumped to her feet and clapped her hands together. Right, boys versus girls, snowball fight, let's go! She took off out the door. Briar kissed Zach on the cheek, told him good luck, and raced after her. I worried Cody wasn't going to think this was a good idea, but he motioned for me to go.
You'll need a head start,
he said with a wink.
Oh, you're on,
I said, and raced after Briar and Nyala. We hit the ground with our laughter echoing around us. The air was cold, but Briar summoned several fiery orbs to hover around us and fight back the chill. We scouted out a location to make 3 different snow forts. With a few quick moves of Nyala's hands, she'd constructed ice barriers for us to hide behind. She'd just finished creating a mass supply of snowballs for us to use. Then one was hurtling straight for Briar's face. She cast a shield just in time for the snow to explode inches away from hitting its target. Then the fight was on. I'd never had a snowball fight in my life, let alone one between 6 summoners. It certainly made the entire spectacle that much better. Briar launched a barrage of snowballs using her spirit summoning. Zach blocked most of them, but her attack had only been a distraction for Nyala. She beamed him in the face with a massive one the size of a melon that knocked him on his ass. Jack quickly got them back, though. I had no idea how he managed to do it, but he snuck behind our ice forts and nailed them both in the backs with 2 snowballs. The ground rumbled beneath my feet. A second later, I realized how Cody'd helped Jack sneak across the makeshift battlefield. Cody and his damned earth summoning were too damn good for a fair snowball fight. Cody dropped a snowball right on top of my head. I gasped at the cold slipping under my sweater. Laughing far louder and more carefree than I'd heard, he wrapped his arms around me, stopping me from grabbing a handful of snow to get him back. He lifted me off my feet, then spun me around until we wound up as a heap of tangled limbs in the snow. Admit defeat, he said, dumping more snow on me while I grabbed a handful of white powder. Never, I said through my laughter, and chucked snow straight at his face. He shook it away like a wild beast. That goofy smile appeared on his face, and I sat up to kiss him. He was embracing me right back, and I sank into the moment. I let it surround me, the laughter, the love, the sheer joy that had come about tonight. For the first time ever, I was happy. No, more than happy. I felt like I'd come home.
All right, losers, make the next round of hot chocolate,
Zach declared.
You wish you were the winners. We definitely won that fight,
Briar argued. Cody kissed me one last time. With a twitch of his head, the earth pushed us gently to our feet. The snow was coming down heavier now. Briar's fire orbs remained around us all, keeping us enclosed in a ring of warmth and lighting up the night. We trekked across the snowy grounds. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Then my scars prickled. I told myself to keep walking, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. I glanced behind us, just as a figure darted behind one of the willow trees nearby. He'd been too far away from the light to make out his face perfectly. And yet he'd been familiar. Too familiar. Remus? Shit, was I going to start seeing his ghost now, too? What is it? Cody's hand tightened around mine. I waited for a beat, but the figure never stepped out from behind the tree. I thought I saw someone. Where? I pointed, and Cody waited until the others were standing beside me. Then he and Zach went to the willow tree. Their steps were slow and measured. The ground rumbled. I held my breath. A shiver raced down my spine, but it wasn't from the cold. Something was wrong. Cody and Zach closed in on the tree, then stepped behind it. Nothing happened. They shrugged and came back to where we all stood. No one there, Cody assured me. Guys, Briar whispered. Are you sure about that? We turned to look where she pointed. Raven, I breathed. She was back and standing there just as she had every other time she'd appeared to me. Only then, you stepped out from behind Raven. Each bore a face I'd never be able to forget, each twisted in agony. They were dressed in the same black cloaks they'd worn the night they'd died, the night I'd killed them. The firm hold I thought I'd had on my magic these last few weeks crimson, and my grip on reality faltered. The snowy landscape vanished. Defend myself. I had to defend myself and keep myself alive. My scars burned. I winced under the pain. My power pulsed inside of in that warehouse. You're not being attacked. Stay with me. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. Stay with me. He was holding me by my upper arms. His grip was firm. I tried to focus on it and his voice, but the memories kept rising out of the darkness to taunt me. In between each horrible moment, I spotted the robed figures closing in around us. The ground trembled beneath me, but I knew it wasn't because the snowflakes themselves turned to sharp bits of ice. Cody stood so close to it, a shimmering wall of spirit energy crept over me and straight to him. The others ice away from the others. Flames fell from my fingertips, sizzling against the frozen ground. The others' shrieks joined in until it was all I could hear. Each shout caused my panic to worsen. I was breathing way too fast. The wind gusted violently, threatening to rip through the shields I'd put around us. Megan, Raven spoke, her voice reaching me through the tumultuous storm my out-of-control power was causing. I raised my head to look at her. Shadows flowed over her shoulders and consumed her. She became taller, and the shadows billowed around and behind her like a cloak. With another shield, I sensed their magic joining mine. The shadowy reinforced the shield I directed. The monsters slammed into it, and we were thrown back. They rose into the air, howled once more, then took off into... I had to regain control. But I faltered. Them getting hurt because of me. Meg. I whipped my head up. What the hell are you doing? Get back! I shouted at Cody. Trust yourself. He told him to get back again, but a sharp stinging pain erupted along my scars. I curled in on these. I rasped. I'm not going anywhere. He reached for my hands. I'm not sure how he managed to do it, but it worked. I focused on those counts of 5 and gradually regained control of my magic. I returned it to the vortex of light inside me. The snow and ice I'd stirred up fell gently to the ground. The fires sputtered out at my fingertips, and the earth finally stopped shaking. You're insane, I muttered to Cody. And you're stronger than you think. He kissed the top of my head. He set me back and worriedly stared into my eyes. Blanched. I'd completely forgotten it wasn't just Cody and me. I can explain. You just used all 5 elements, Briar went on. There was dead silence for a solid 5 seconds until she burst out laughing. Finally! And smacked her friend on the arm. Seriously? What? It's true. You know, I said in a rush. Please, you don't understand. I'm not... Those dark spots that had been dancing around, he couldn't explain why, but it wasn't his story to share. Then I was scooped up into his arms, and I thought we headed to the dorms. Those things, they weren't ghosts, not like the ones I've seen, Nyala said from somewhere behind us. I don't think they were ever ghosts, Zach commented. Then what? Brought to unconsciousness. I think they're wraiths. Chapter 11. Cody. Wraiths, I said slowly while I stood with the others back in Nyala's apartment. Megan was conscious now and sitting on one of the chairs. She hadn't said much of anything since her eyes opened. She'd mentioned how cool it was to watch Megan's eyes glow like that. I'd bitten my cheek while Megan's glance had shifted to me. I had admitted quietly that lately when she'd been using her magic point to bring them through the veil and tethering point to control them. Zach's brow rose. Do I want to know why you were researching wraiths? She shrugged. Probably not. It was a while ago. So if there are wraiths on campus, find that and we can shut this down. We need to tell Hook, I said, and Megan's hand squeezed mine. I knelt next to the chair and softly said her name to get her to look at me. Night. She nodded and stood up. I'm sorry I ruined the party. You didn't ruin anything, Briar said before I could get the words out. It's not like this is worse, Nyala muttered. Undead or wraiths? Undead sort of just fall apart, you know. It's pretty gross, Briar said with a cringe. She and Zach were about to go speak to Hook tonight.
I nodded in agreement, then escorted Megan out of Nyala's apartment. We reached Megan's door and stepped inside her room. Her shoulders slumped, and I had her in my arms in a blink. She shook while she held on to me, breathing hard and cursing under her breath. "I've got you," I whispered, slowly running my hands up and down her back. "I'm right here."
"Wraiths, Cody," she muttered. "Why are there wraiths coming after me now, huh? Why? Who's doing this shit to me?"
I wished I had answers to give her. So far, looking into Raven's family had brought up dead ends. There'd been no hint of an intruder on campus, but obviously they were better at hiding than we'd assumed.
"Wraiths are dangerous, aren't they?" she asked.
"I'm gonna keep you safe, understand?"
"I'm not worried about me."
"Of course you're not," I muttered. "I'll be all right. We all will be." I glanced down at her. "Despite the wraiths showing up tonight, you should be pretty damn proud of yourself. You didn't lose control."
"Thanks to you."
"No," I argued. "I gave you a little nudge there at the beginning, but the rest was all you." I took her hands and flipped them over, facing her palms to the ceiling. "One of these days you'll be able to use your magic without a second thought. I know it."
"I doubt it."
"I don't," I said sincerely. "You're incredible, Meg, for more than one reason. Never forget that." I drew her back into my arms and held her. "Do you even realize what you did out there?"
"What do you mean?"
"You shielded everyone. That's not easy to do. I think that's what you did inside the haunted house, too. You put up a shield around me without even realizing you did it. That's not an easy feat to accomplish. Ask Briar and Zach."
"Then why wasn't I able to do it at the warehouse?" she whispered. "Why did I let Raven and her family die?"
"That was an entirely different situation, and you know that. They were hurting you. They were probably going to kill you," I said, the words coming out rough. "One of these days you'll stop blaming yourself for their deaths."
"Or, I'll just be attacked by wraiths and go insane."
"Never going to happen," I swore, glad she wasn't able to see my face right then. Tonight had shaken me worse than I was letting on. I could have a moment later once I was alone. Watching those wraiths manifest and charge straight for Megan tore into me. I could protect her from physical attacks, but wraiths? What the hell was I supposed to do against wraiths? Spirit summoning was really the only way to block their attacks. We had to find the source, and find it quickly. Megan wasn't wrong. Wraiths were damn dangerous. They fed off a person's living essence, and for summoners, their magic. The stronger the victim, the more powerful the wraith would become. If one of them was able to attack Megan for long enough, I couldn't even imagine how strong that monster would become. After a little while, she slipped out of her shoes and climbed into bed. She held out her hand for mine, and I sat down beside her. I wound up lying down facing her, our hands held between us. Her eyes drifted shut, and I was thankful she was able to fall asleep. I stayed with her until I was sure she was out, then carefully pulled myself away. Quietly, I slipped out of her room and ensured the wards on her door were intact. That done, I headed for Hook's office. Briar and Zach would have gone straight there. If whoever brought these wraiths here was the same one who'd trapped Megan in the haunted house, they'd up their game. Wraiths weren't something a person messed around with for the hell of it. They were out for blood. Megan's blood. Outside the dorms, the ground trembled beneath my feet. I paused before heading inside the main building, wanting to regain control over my emotions and magic. Only when I knew I wasn't going to lose it did I enter the building. We'd tell Hook, then get a plan in place to find where the wraiths were coming from. I would not be helpless to protect the person I cared about. Not this time. Hook held a mug of freshly brewed coffee between his hands. "Wraiths? I haven't dealt with wraiths in decades. Nasty creatures. At least it's winter break. I can't allow the rest of the students to return until this situation is handled." "I've already contacted Adam," Zach said from where he sat in front of Hook's desk with Briar beside him. I'd taken up a post at the windows. I'd been watching the snow fall on the grounds, waiting for another one of those monsters to appear. "We should start the search for this source point tonight." "We need to wait until we have more talents here," Zach argued. "Fire and spirit are really the only elements that will do any real damage to wraiths." which is why we should be out there already searching for the source. We find it, we destroy it, and no more wraiths. The walls trembled beside me, making the windows rattle in their frames. I found myself counting to 5 inside my head in an attempt not to lose control. All I'm asking for is another couple of hours. Give the rest of the Talons a chance to get here and join the search, Zack said. He was right. I knew he was. I started to turn, telling him I was giving him 2 hours exactly. After that, I was going to start searching the campus myself. A shadow darting across the snow caught my eye. I jerked back to the window and peered out. Cody. Then 10. When I hit 30 without seeing the shadow again, I was ready to brush it. I whispered and sprinted out of Hook's office. Briar, Zack, and Hook took off after me, yelling at me. I never slowed. That had been a wraith. I knew it had been. I never should have left Megan alone. I nearly fell while running on the ice-covered sidewalks. The doors to the dorms had been thrown open, and the glass windows shattered. The doors themselves were broken and barely hanging on by a hinge each. Screams erupted from inside. I threw myself forward, already pulling on my magic. The stairwells and halls that were usually lit were pitch black. I cursed, tripping over the steps, until floating orbs from the sound of it, she and Zack weren't too far behind me. Neither was Hook. I reached Megan's floor and charged down the hall. The stones around me hummed, waiting to come at my call. There, hovering just outside Megan's door, was a wraith. It was my right hand forward. I sent a ripple of stones down the wall that slammed into the wraith. Stones exploded into clouds of dust, and the wraith barely flinched. It turned toward me. It let out a raspy sound that passed for a laugh, then slammed 2 shadowy skeletal bony hands. A faint violent shimmering surrounded her body and was being pulled in coldness. It left my limbs numb. For a second it was like something was yanking me forward by a rope attached to my gut. Then I was blasted back into the corridor. "What the fuck?" she groaned. The faint shimmering around her body told me she'd at least been able to throw a shield around herself before she was attacked. "It did nothing. I don't understand." "It's warded," Hook uttered, sounding confused, just as Nyala and Jack came rushing toward us. "Someone placed a barrier ward on the wraith." "What?" I moved back to the doorway. Hook was right. After Briar and I had attacked, the sigils creating the ward around the wraith were visible. They burned bright red against the shadows. Megan was still clutched in its grip. I had to get to her. Yelling for the others to stand back, I raised both hands. The stones trembled, then each time the magic rebounded, Zack and Hook were right there to keep us from being tossed away. Finally, the ward cracked. 30 seconds had passed at most, but it had felt like an eternity. I raised my eyes to Megan, willing her to hold on. But her eyes had shut, and her body hung limp in the creature's grasp. Why wasn't her magic reacting at all? Why wasn't it fighting back? Cody?" Briar muttered beside me. I wasn't sure what she'd seen, but then I spotted it too. Megan's eyes might have been closed, but they were glowing beneath the lids. The wraith let out another raspy sound of delight. The shimmering violet light around Megan turned the same gold color that shone in her eyes. Her power. It was feeding off her power. Megan's eyes shot open. She raised her hands, and I was struck at the sight. Fire, spirit energy, the water she pulled from the air, and the air itself, swarmed around her hands and upper arms. An unnatural scream erupted from Megan's mouth. She grabbed hold of the wraith, snatching fistfuls of shadows like they were really there. The energy she'd summoned warmed around the wraith, ripping through its body like paper. The warding Briar and I had nearly broken, shattered like glass with bursts of bright red flashes of light. The wraith howled, and Megan shouted over it. The golden glow became blinding. There was a horrible cracking sound. The window was blown out, and the entire building shook as if it was ready to come down on our heads. The glare faded. I squinted, straining to see clearly. The wraith had been obliterated. The rear wall of Megan's room was just gone. She teetered right on the edge. Snow blew in from the gap, along with a burst of cold air. The glow in her eyes dissipated. She glanced my way. Time froze. Then she fell. I lunged forward, catching hold of her hand, but couldn't find anything to grab onto. I aimed one hand at the building and wrapped my other arm around Megan's waist. Stones stretched out from the wall and created a rough slide. I took the brunt of the impact, keeping her head tucked against my chest the best I could. We rolled down the stones until we ended up in the snow. Megan was shivering. Ignoring my own pains, I tapped her cheeks, needing her to open her damned eyes. She mumbled my name under her breath. "You're all right," I told her, hating the quiver in my voice. "You're going to be all right. I've got you." Her eyes opened for a few seconds. She clutched at my shirt and tried to speak again. The words were too quiet for me to hear. She curled in on herself, grimacing in pain. I said her name, but she didn't open her eyes again. Hook and the others came rushing toward where we'd landed. "We need to get you both to the infirmary." With his and Zach's help, I made it to my feet. Jack offered to carry Megan, but I shook my head. I wasn't going to let her go just yet. I couldn't. I glowered up at the hole that had been Megan's dorm room, then set off toward the main building and the infirmary. The second Megan was tucked away and safe, I was finding that damn source point where the wraiths were coming from. Then I was going to destroy it and finish this before anyone else hurt her. "You should have given yourself a few more hours to recover," Zach scolded. "I'm fine. You look like shit." I paused in reaching for the door of the last room in this hallway and glowered. "You're telling me that if you watched a wraith attempt to drain the life and magic out of Briar, you'd be content to sit around and wait?" His worried scowl gave way to a frown. "If you push yourself too hard and collapse, Megan will be pissed. That's all I'm saying." At the mention of Megan, I remembered how I'd left her in the infirmary a couple of hours ago. She was under the guard of 4 Talons, as well as Nyala and Jack, who'd offered to stay right by her side. She hadn't woken up at all yet, though Maggie had assured me that she would recover. She simply needed time to rest. That could mean anything from a few hours to a few days. She hadn't just been drained. She'd destroyed a wraith, not scared it off or made it flee or sent it back beyond the veil. She'd ripped it apart until it was nothing. At what cost was the question I hadn't stopped asking myself. Zach rested a hand on my shoulder and gave it a squeeze. "She'll wake up, and hopefully when she does, you can tell her the good news."
"Yeah, if we ever find this fucking totem,"
Briar muttered, voicing my aggravation. She came up to stand beside us in the corridor. We were in the main building, going through every room and closet and crawl space this place had. So far, we'd turned up nothing. The handful of Talons that had already been on campus, including Luke and Nick, had split up into groups to start searching the rest of the place. I yanked open the door to the room in front of us, one of the last lecture halls. I wasn't surprised to find it empty. Damn it! I slammed the door and stormed down the corridor. Zach and Briar followed. We reached the main doors and stepped outside. Morning had come, but a strange heaviness hung in the air. The snow continued to come down in light flurries. I planted my hands on my hips and observed the grounds. A trio of Talons was just emerging from the woods to the south side of the lake. They didn't appear to have found anything and moved on. "This is taking too long," I snapped. "You'd think we'd be able to sense something as powerful as a source point for bringing wraiths here."
"Unless it's that heavily shielded."
Briar tilted her head.
"But even then, the magical essence would have been picked up by someone or the wards. You said Megan saw the first wraith weeks ago."
"Unless that one wasn't a wraith," Zach suggested. "An illusion, maybe?" I had no answer for him. I asked what buildings had yet to be checked. He told me the one that housed the artifacts was next on our list. We moved across the grounds, heading toward it. 30 yards away, the air became thick. I threw out my arm, halting Zach and Briar. The same icy chill I'd picked up on last year after each of the pranks returned. It wasn't from the snow. This was a bone-chilling cold. A ripple of energy rushed past us. The light that had come with the morning turned to darkness, as if night had fallen once more.
"Well, that's not good,"
Briar whispered. "We should." An explosion of howling and shadows cut off Zach's words. The force of it sent a shockwave straight for us. We were lifted off our feet and tossed through the air. The building that had once stood was a ruined shell now. Wraiths erupted from its center, filling the sky while they shrieked. And there, jutting up from the ground, was a stone monolith. Its sides were etched in swirling, pulsing lines of red and violet magic. The source point. We'd found it. But as wraiths continued to spew into the sky, I wondered if we'd found it too late.
Chapter 12. Meg. I could have sworn I heard Cody's voice close by. He was arguing with someone. Everything shook. Worried he was about to lose it, I tried to say his name, reach for him, but I couldn't do either. I felt so tired. Beyond tired. Was that even possible? Familiar lips pressed against my forehead. A hand squeezed mine. Then both touches were gone. What happened? I'd gone back to my room after we'd encountered those wraiths outside. I'd been sleeping. Cody had been next to me. Then I'd woken up. There'd been this wretched howling. My door had blown open, and I shot upright, gasping for air and fighting against the blankets someone had draped over me. "Easy," Nyala said to my right. "Easy, Megan. You're okay." "Wraith," I blurted. "Where is it?" "It's gone. You killed it," she told me. She glanced behind her, and there was Jack stepping up to join her. "It drained you, though. You're gonna feel like shit for a few days, maybe longer. You really need to rest right now." "I killed it? How can you even kill a wraith?" "Doesn't matter, 'cause you did it," Jack informed me, sounding impressed. "It was something." I killed a wraith. Scrunching my eyes shut, I strained to remember everything. I remembered the wraith snatching me out of bed. I remembered feeling as if all my energy was being drained. Then it went after my magic. And nothing. I asked Nyala and Jack for more details. She seemed hesitant, but after a nudge from Jack, they told me what they'd been able to witness from the hallway. At the end of the short story, I slumped on the pillows. "I did that?" "Yeah, I think you also blew up your room," Jack added, and Nyala shushed him. "What? She's going to notice the giant hole in the side of the building eventually." "Was anyone else hurt?" "No, the wraith went after you. Briar and Cody got knocked around trying to get you, but just bumps and bruises." Nyala said it with a smile, but she fidgeted. Icy patterns appeared on her hands, and even snow flurries began to form around her. I peered around the infirmary. Outside, I heard voices talking. Inside the door were two people, a man and a woman bearing the Talon uniform. But Cody wasn't here. "Nyala, where is he?" I asked. "He'll be right back. You don't need to worry at all," she said far too brightly. I threw my legs over the side of the bed. When I went to stand, it was like all the strength had been zapped from my limbs. I would have hit the floor if not for each of them catching an arm. What the hell? The dizziness came next. With it was a weird ache in my chest I didn't understand. "I told you, you need to rest," Nyala scolded. "Get back in bed, Megan." "Where is he?" I repeated, not moving an inch. Nyala worried at her bottom lip and looked at Jack. Whatever silent argument they were having, she seemed to lose. "He's scouring the grounds with the other Talons, searching for the source point." "With how many Talons?" I asked. "Not enough," Jack muttered, and Nyala shot him a look. "What? He should have waited." I took a step forward. My legs trembled, but I managed to stay upright. Nyala and Jack kept firm holds on my arms, telling me to get back to bed. "If he's out there, I'm going to help him. Those wraiths are after me. They're here because of me. I won't let him or anyone else get hurt." "You can't even stand up on your own," Nyala argued. "Megan, please. Cody asked us to watch over you." Ignoring them, I kept trying to walk. The two Talons near the door headed toward us. If they called Maggie, she'd most likely knock me back out so I wouldn't do anything stupid. The pale light that had been streaming through the infirmary windows dimmed and turned dark. Nyala, Jack, and I turned to look. The two Talons paused too. If I hadn't known any better, I would have said it was night. I started to ask if it was the wraiths, but the words never left my mouth. A shockwave of energy crashed through the room. It slammed into us with enough force to knock us off our feet. An explosion came after, booming across the campus and blowing out several windows. Jack rushed to cover Nyala's head and mine, while glass fell around us. The Talons shouted and bolted out the door. Someone shouted wraiths. I sat up, peering out the broken windows. Fear threatened to crush my lungs. Though it had grown dark outside, wraiths, darker than pitch, soared through the sky. "Cody," I breathed, reaching up to clasp the dragon charm still hanging around my neck. Though every inch of me had felt drained seconds ago, now furious energy flowed through my veins. I made it to my feet, driven by that invisible force. I looked over at Jack and Nyala once they made it to their feet. "Megan," Nyala gasped, "your eyes, they're glowing." I had no doubt they were. "I'm going after Cody." I started forward and jerked to a halt after I noticed they were following me. "No, stay here." "Our friends are out there too," Jack told me. "If you're going out there, we'll be right behind you." He gripped Nyala's hand with his left. Flames flickered to life in his right, and he nodded at me. Nyala's skin became coated in a fine sheen of ice that quickly spread to Jack. If I'd had longer, I would have had a chance to admire the beautiful patterns lit by his flames, but the wraiths were shrieking and people were screaming. They needed help. I'd brought these wraiths down on their heads, and I was going to be the one to stop them. Unsure of how long this surge of energy would last, I charged for the door, through the corridors, and out to the grounds. At the sight of the mayhem, I expected to feel the familiar panic set in. Instead, it was like my magic was completely in control of every part of me. It pushed aside any and all fear, leaving only the need to protect those I could. Nyala and Jack rushed out the doors and stood beside me. I reached a hand to Nyala, creating a shield around her that quickly spread to Jack. Before they could question me, I turned back to the fight and started forward. I had the strangest sensation, like I was walking through a dream. I'd never felt this alive before, or this strong. A voice in the back of my head warned me it wouldn't last forever. I scanned the grounds. Talons fought off wraiths in every direction. Most weren't spirit summoners, though. They'd attack with fire and ice, but the wraiths took the hits and came right back for more. There was something weird about them, too. Red sigils appeared around them every time they were struck. The Talons were going to lose people if we couldn't find that source point. No, I wouldn't let any of them die. I can't. A second surge of energy rose, filling me with a fiery heat. I clapped my hands together, and spirit energy came to my call, pulled from the swirling vortex within me. With a shout, I slammed my hands on the ground, using the energy of the earth to carry my magic across the grounds. Each time it reached a Talon, a new shield rose to encase them, giving them a fighting chance. I raised my hands from the snow and swayed. For a second, voices clamored inside my head. They sounded like me, but not at the same time. Then they were gone, and the sounds of fighting rushed in. Cody. I had to find Cody. A fiery explosion came from my right. Most of the wraiths appeared to be swarming from there, too. Staggering for the first few steps, I pushed ahead, noting that Jack, Nyala, and the Talons from the infirmary had stuck close by. I appreciated them not leaving me alone. Not too far ahead, where there used to be a round building with a domed roof, now there was a stone monolith sticking up out of the ground, and standing not too far from it was a face I'd never thought I'd see again. It wasn't ghostly, and he sure as hell wasn't a wraith. He had his hands clasped behind his back, while he casually watched the mayhem he'd caused. "Remus," I whispered, ready to go after him. The ground violently quaked, and a furious shout reached my ears. Cody! That was Cody, and he was close. I turned away to search for him. By the time I glanced back, Remus was gone. The power inside me screamed, wanting me to give chase. I took 2 steps in that direction, but Cody yelled again. I whipped around. He was pinned to the ground by a wraith more than ready to feed off him. Fury overrode everything else. Pulling spirit energy into my hands once more, I aimed them at the wraith and unleashed it all. With a shriek, the wraith reeled back, then shot off into the sky. I sprinted to Cody and grabbed him by his hand. "Meg?" He stood up, staring at me in awe. "Later," I promised him, though I had no real idea of what was happening either, or how I was doing it. Right then, I didn't much care. "How do we stop this?" "The source point. We have to destroy it," he said, tucking his questions aside and focusing on what mattered. He pointed to the stone monolith. "We're going to need some help."
He was right about that. That energy surge was beginning to wane. Soon enough, I was going to fall over, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to get back up. He was already yelling at everyone within earshot to get to the monolith. He held onto my hand and gave me a questioning look. I sucked in a deep breath and nodded. I was fine. I could do this. I'd make sure everyone was safe. Then I'd pass out and sleep for a week. Chapter 13. Cody. Megan's eyes were glowing bright gold. Her hand vibrated while I held it in mine. Whatever was going on with her right then in her magic, I doubted it'd last long. I bit back the scolding I wanted to give her for leaving the infirmary and rushing out here. But she'd just saved my ass. Together, and with a handful of others trailing us, we sprinted for the source point that had brought the wraiths into this world. Around its base was a set of circles expanding outward. They pulsed with the same magic that appeared to be powering the stone. Each time it built to a crescendo, more wraiths would spew forth. Briar appeared to my right. She created a massive fireball between her hands and unleashed it. It reached the edge of the circles and ricocheted straight back at her. Zack throwing up a shield stopped them and everyone around them from being blasted back. "The circles!" I yelled. "We need to disrupt them. I need all Earth Summoners to the front." Guys, I think they know what we're doing," Megan yelled. The wraiths that had been scattered across the campus were now converging on us. "Shields!" Zack shouted. "Get some wind gusting. It might slow them down. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The Earth Summoners present, including Nick and Luke Pierce, rushed toward the front to stand with me. Megan stayed by my side too. About 10 more summoners spread out, forming a circle around the one we were going to try and destroy. Amid the Talons getting ready to guard our backs, I spotted Hook and several other faculty members rushing in to give us what aid they could. Hook had flames dripping from his hands like water and looked pissed. A wraith came straight for him. He snapped his fingers and a fiery explosion sent it veering off course. He took his place with the others and turned his back to me. I nodded to the Earth Summoners around me. While the wraiths bared down on us, their howling increasing in volume until it was deafening, we focused our magic on the ground around the monolith. Though it shook, the circles held firm. I forced more of my energy outward. Sweat beaded my forehead, turning cold with a chill in the air. Behind us, the fight continued. I tried to tune out the shouting, but slowly, memories of the day I lost my dad started to surface. I began to falter. Then Megan's hand was holding mine again. She squeezed it with 5 quick pulses. The second time through, I pushed through the painful memories. There was nothing I could do to change the past, but I could help save those here today. I was strong enough now to do that. A strange burst of energy shot from Megan into me. I wasn't sure what drove me to do it, but I reached out my right hand and rested my hand on Luke's arm. He reached out for his brother, and on the chain of power went until the Talon beside Megan had rested her hand on her shoulder. The ground buckled and heaved. A massive crack formed from where Megan stood and shot straight toward the stone monolith. It met resistance at the glowing circles of the magic for a second. With a blinding burst of green light, it burst straight through it. The circles fizzled out one by one, leaving the monolith open to attack. Megan's hand went limp in mine. She fell into me, then hit her knees. I started to reach for her, but she shook her head. "Destroy it!" she rasped. Behind us, those watching our back had been forced closer. The wraiths swarmed them. The shield Briar and Zack had formed to keep them back was fading with every hit. Cracks were forming in the monolith, while the Earth Summoners struck it again and again. But it wasn't going to be fast enough. Megan peered over her shoulder and cursed. Her eyes flared brighter, and she pushed herself to her feet. I said her name, but she either couldn't hear me or ignored me. She went to where Briar and Zack stood and laid a hand on each of their shoulders. The shield around us flared with new energy, pushing the wraiths back. Then Megan hit her knees once more and stayed there. I focused all my attention on bringing down that damn monolith and ending this. The wall I'd used to keep myself in control fractured piece by piece. Then it was just gone. An explosion of magic erupted from my core and struck the monolith dead center. The magic powering it faded. The top half toppled to the right, crashing to the ground.
The wraiths burst into shadows. One by one, they were dragged back to where the monolith was still breaking apart. The last one struck the ground, and all was quiet. "Meg," I whispered, then shouted her name and rushed to her side. Her eyes were barely glowing now. She smiled at me. "Hey, you are insanely incredible. Do you know that?" I murmured, kissing her forehead. She slumped against me and nodded. "Starting to realize you might be right." She was quiet for a second. Then she whispered my name. "Yeah?" "Can you maybe take me back to the infirmary? Pretty sure I'm gonna pass out." "That I can do." I lifted her into my arms, cradled her against my chest, and slowly started walking away from the broken monolith. Surprisingly, we hadn't lost anyone, a fact I was damned grateful for. Quite a few Talons were down, but they'd recover after a few days of rest. I'd barely taken 5 steps, and someone let out a panicked shout. A massive, shadowy form, far larger than any of the wraiths we'd just fought, emerged from the broken monolith. Red eyes gleamed, and its thunderous howl shook the entire mountain. The force of it slammed into my back. Megan and I went flying, hit the ground, and rolled apart. The shadow crawled across the ground. Talons rushed in to attack, but it was already streaming straight for Megan. She raised her hand, but the glow had vanished from her eyes. She wasn't going to be able to stop it. Scrambling to get upright, I shouted and threw myself at her. I caught her in my arms, covering her with my body. The utter feeling of pure fear struck my back. The cold followed it. There was a furious shriek. Then I collapsed. Megan said my name, but I couldn't respond. There was only the cold. Then everything went dark. Chapter 14. Meg. I held Cody's hand, waiting for him to open his damn eyes. My leg hadn't stopped bouncing since Maggie had finally let me out of my own bed to sit with him. It had been 2 days since we fought off the wraiths. I'd slept for most of the first, though I'd fought to stay conscious as much as possible. I'd been too damn worried about Cody to let myself get much rest. Even now, I felt drained. I'd been attacked by a wraith and had gone out to fight more without letting myself recover the first time. I'd be lucky if Maggie let me leave the infirmary by the time spring classes started up. Outside the door, Hook was speaking with General Adam Pierce and his brothers, Nick, Luke, and Zach. They'd been by their infirmary every day to check on Cody and me. Thankfully, there'd only been a handful of students on campus who'd been put in danger. Out of those, none of them had seen me summon more than one element. Neither had the Talons I'd fought beside. Someone had mentioned the shields that had protected them all during the fight. I'd given Briar a panicked glance, and she'd quickly taken the credit for doing it. My secret remained safe, for the most part. The Pierce brothers knew, but I trusted them. Cody had assured me they were good guys. With everything that had happened, I'd told Adam who and what I was, why my parents kept it a secret, and why I thought these attacks were happening now. I know what I saw out there in the snow right before the wraiths attacked us the first time, and I knew it had been him standing beside that Remus. He'd been there, and he hadn't been a wraith. He'd survived after all, and now he was coming for me and everyone. You better wake up soon, I told him sternly. Why'd you have to do that, huh? Monolith had been erected to create the source point for the wraiths. It had pulsed with magic that weighed heavy in the air, and even now made my skin crawl simply remembering it. I stared down at my hand holding Cody's, just as I had while we'd used our earth summoning to break that monolith and send the wraiths back through the veil. The stone column had cracked and toppled to the ground. I'd thought it was over. I thought we were all safe. Then that massive shadow had risen out of the ground. Its howl had turned my blood to ice. The darkness had billowed around it as it had risen higher and higher, the force of its scream tossing Cody and me apart. The wraith had turned its piercing red eyes on me then. It launched itself forward. I'd raised my hands, but I'd hit the ground with Cody lying atop me. He'd taken the blow meant for me. The wraith had shot straight up into the night sky and vanished into a cloud of black smoke. Cody had only grunted in pain before going limp. He hadn't opened his eyes since. "It should be me lying here," I scolded him. "I can't have anything happen to you. Don't you get that? Wake up, Cody. Please, just wake up." I kept one hand holding his. The other reached up to fiddle with a dragon charm hanging around my neck. It felt like so long ago that he gave it to me, and it had only been, 3 days? I lowered my head to the edge of the bed and waited. In the silence, my thoughts drifted to what else had occurred during that fight. The surge of energy that had encompassed me had been like nothing I'd felt before. At first, I'd been excited that I'd managed to gain total control over my magic. Then I remembered the voices I'd heard. It had only been for a second, but they'd been there. Those voices had been the driving force behind everything I'd done. It hadn't only been me out there fighting the wraiths. My magic had taken on a mind of its own. I'd let it out, and I wasn't sure what would happen once I fully recovered. Would I be able to control it if it tried to burst free again? I hadn't felt entirely in control of myself out there. It was a terrifying thought. It might have let me act as a booster to everyone else's magic, something I hadn't even realized I'd been able to do. But if I wasn't in complete control of my magic, what was to stop it from turning on those close to me? What was to stop it from turning on me, as it had once before? Cody's finger tapping 5 times against my hand yanked me from my spiraling thoughts. I shot upright. So damn slowly, one eye fluttered open, then the other. "Meg?" "Right here." "What the hell is wrong with you? Why did you do that?" His lips twitched. "Can't even let me be conscious for a minute before you start in on me." "I never said I was the patient one out of the 2 of us." "You certainly did not." He raised his other hand and held my cheek. "Come here." I moved in and gently pressed my lips to his. "Don't scare me like that again," I said. "I'm not about to watch you get hurt." With my help, he sat up all the way, trying and failing to hide a grimace. "How bad is the pain?" "I've had worse. I'll live." "Not the point. Maggie will want to know." Cody let out a heavy sigh. "I promise it's not that bad." "And you're okay?" "Yeah, surprisingly. And everyone else is too, for the most part. From what I heard, none of the students were hurt. A few other Talons were wounded. They've already been taken back to HQ to heal there." His thumb rubbed my knuckles. "There's something else." "It can wait." "Meg, tell me." He frowned at our joined hands, then swung his legs over the edge of the bed. Somehow I wound up in his arms. "You're shaking." "Sorry, I just saw something during the fight." Remus. I could tell him about Remus, but I wasn't going to mention the fear I had about my magic and what it had done. I would tell him that later. Maybe. "Remus is alive." "Raven's brother? Are you sure?" "I saw him twice." "I thought you said his name that night," he muttered. "When was the second time?" "Right before I found you out there. I should have gone after him, but that wraith was attacking you, and then we were going after the monolith. And you went down, and I didn't think about him again until I was inside, talking to Hook and the Pierce brothers." I rambled. I told him everything." Cody's arms tensed. "It's going to be okay, Meg, I promise." "And what if it's not? Remus is alive and he's coming for me. He wants to kill me, Cody. And if that's not bad enough, all this shit is going to get back to my parents. I trust Adam not to let them know, but somehow they'll find out." I squeezed him tighter, hoping I wasn't hurting him, but I couldn't ease up. I was terrified he'd somehow vanish out of my arms. I was terrified of a lot of shit right then. "Remus will not lay a hand on you," Cody swore, and the stones around us trembled with his words. "Everything else we'll deal with when we need to. But you won't lose me. You won't." I wanted to believe him. There were too many unknowns, though, and even though he was awake and would be fine after the wraith attack, even he couldn't see the future. I clung to him, and I'd keep clinging to him for as long as I could. When tomorrow came, I had a feeling nothing either of us said would make a difference. End of Book 10.
This has been Inheritance, Another Generation, Academy of Ancients, Book 10. Written by Avery Cross. Narrated by Jack Ainsworth. Copyright 2023 by Avery Cross. Production copyright by Avery Cross.